Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Last November 2021, I decided to take my wife Hannah and our two daughters, Emma, 11, and Lily, 8, to Mount Hood for Thanksgiving weekend. We'd been cooped up for too long with all the pandemic stuff, and I thought a nice cabin in the woods would be a perfect getaway. Nothing fancy, just a chance to disconnect and spend time together. I found this great little rental about 20 miles from government camp, secluded enough to feel like we were really getting away, but not so remote that it felt unsafe. The drive from Portland was beautiful, and on a whim, we stopped at this quirky little Bigfoot museum in Boring. The girls were obsessed with cryptids and monsters thanks to some YouTube channel they'd been watching, so I figured they'd get a kick out of it. It was one of those small-town attractions with plaster footprint casts, blurry photos, and newspaper clippings. Pretty standard stuff. What stuck with me, though, was a conversation I had with the older guy working there, Tim or Tom, I think. When I mentioned we were headed to Mount Hood for the weekend, his expression changed slightly. He wasn't trying to scare us or anything, but he casually mentioned that the Mount Hood wilderness area had a history of strange encounters. He shared stories from hunters and hikers who claimed to have heard unusual sounds or found odd structures and footprints. Nothing specific to our rental area, just general comments about the forest around Mount Hood. I didn't think much of it at the time. I'm not really a Bigfoot believer, but I enjoy the folklore. Hannah rolled her eyes at the whole thing, but the girls were excited, making plans to go Sasquatch hunting during our trip. We arrived at the cabin Friday afternoon. It was perfect. A two-bedroom A-frame with a nice deck, surrounded by towering pines. The nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away. Our first day was completely normal. We hiked a nearby trail, made s'mores, played board games. It was exactly the relaxing family time I'd hoped for. The second night is when everything changed. We'd had a full day. The girls were exhausted from hiking and exploring, so they were asleep by 8:30. Hannah turned in around 10, but I wasn't tired yet. I poured myself a whiskey and sat on the deck for a while, just enjoying the quiet and the stars. That's when I started thinking about the Bigfoot stories again. It was a clear night, almost full moon. The forest was beautiful in the moonlight, and I had this sudden urge to explore a bit. I know it sounds ridiculous, a grown man wandering into the woods at night because of some Bigfoot stories, but there was something compelling about the silence and the moonlight. I grabbed my jacket, headlamp and phone, thinking I'd just walk a little way down the path near the cabin. About 200 yards from the cabin, I found this small clearing. I stopped there and just listened. That's when I first noticed something odd. The forest was completely silent. No crickets, no night birds, nothing. Just absolute silence. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that's not normal. Forests are noisy places, especially at night. I don't know what possessed me, but I remembered something from that museum about wood knocking. Apparently it's a way Bigfoot creatures supposedly communicate. I picked up a fallen branch and knocked it against a tree trunk 3 times. I felt stupid doing it, like a kid playing a game. After my 3rd attempt, something answered from deeper in the forest. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't my imagination. It was a much heavier, deliberate knock that came from at least 100 yards deeper in the trees. My heart started racing, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a falling branch. Maybe another cabin I didn't know about. Hell, maybe even another tourist playing the same game. Then I remembered another Bigfoot call from some TV show, this weird whoop sound. Again, feeling kind of foolish, I cupped my hands and made this loud whoop sound. That's when everything changed. The atmosphere shifted in a way I still have trouble describing. The air suddenly felt heavier, like the barometric pressure had dropped. The darkness between the trees seemed to thicken. It got noticeably colder too. I could see my breath when I couldn't before. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps moving through the forest. Not like a deer or an elk. These were bipedal steps, methodical and deliberate. Something large was walking toward me. What came next sends chills through me even now. From maybe 50, 60 yards ahead came this deep, guttural roar. It wasn't a bear or any animal I've ever heard. It was lower, longer, and somehow intelligent sounding, like it had purpose behind it. As I stood there frozen, I heard a sharp whistle from my right side. Not a bird whistle, a human-like whistle, but louder and more penetrating than any person could make. Without thinking, I whistled back. Just a reflex response. Immediately, a large rock or piece of wood slammed into a tree about 10 feet from me. Whatever threw it had serious strength behind it. That's when I realized what was happening. There were two of them. One directly in front of me, moving closer, and one circling around to my right. They were coordinating, communicating with each other. They were hunting me. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, and that's when I saw them. Two large, yellowish-white reflective eyes about 7 to 8 feet off the ground. Not like deer or bear eyes that just reflect light. These eyes caught the light, but they were different, more penetrating, more aware. They were watching me with intelligence, calculating. I only saw them for a split second before they blinked and disappeared into the darkness. Pure survival instinct kicked in. I turned and started walking quickly back toward the cabin, fighting the urge to run. Something told me running would trigger a chase response. The entire way back, I could hear heavy footfalls paralleling my path just inside the tree line. Occasionally, whistles would exchange between the two creatures. One ahead of me now, cutting me off from the cabin, and one behind. I've never felt terror like that. It wasn't just fear of physical harm. It was this primal, deep-seated horror of something intelligent that shouldn't exist. When the cabin came into view, I finally broke into a sprint. I made it to the door, fumbled with the lock, and practically fell inside. I locked the door behind me, checked that all the windows were secure, and looked out from behind the curtains. I couldn't see anything in the tree line, but I could feel them watching the cabin. I didn't wake my family. What would I even say? I sat in the living room with all the lights off, just listening. Throughout the night, the knocking sounds continued, sometimes close, sometimes farther away, always in sets of 3. The whistles continued too, passing back and forth like they were communicating. Several times I heard rocks or something similar striking trees around the property. I didn't sleep at all that night. When dawn finally came, the sounds stopped. After Hannah and the girls woke up, I made an excuse about wanting to check out a different hiking trail and went back to the clearing. In daylight, what I found chilled me even more. There were trees broken at strange heights, not cut, not fallen naturally, but snapped about 7 to 8 feet up. Some smaller saplings were twisted and bent in ways that didn't make sense. And there were wide, trampled paths through the underbrush that hadn't been there the day before. I didn't tell my family what happened. They were having such a good time, and I convinced myself maybe I'd overreacted to normal forest sounds. Maybe it was all just my imagination running wild after those museum stories. But that night, around 2 a.m., a loud bang woke me up. Something had thrown what must have been a beach ball-sized rock onto our deck. When I checked it in the morning, it was far too heavy for a person to throw easily, especially from a distance. I stayed up the rest of that night, listening to heavy footfalls circling the cabin, deep groaning sounds that didn't belong to any animal I know, and loud knocks echoing across the ridge. At one point, something large moved past the bedroom window. I just caught a dark silhouette, massive and upright. As soon as the sun came up, I woke everyone and insisted we pack up. I made up some story about a work emergency requiring us to get back to Portland. Hannah was annoyed, the girls disappointed, but something in my expression must have convinced them not to argue. The entire drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. We made it home safely, but I haven't been the same since. I've spent months researching similar encounters, trying to make sense of what happened. I've read about territorial behaviors, wood knocking, rock throwing, and coordinated movements. Everything matches what I experienced. But what haunts me most are those eyes I saw in the forest. Intelligent, calculating, aware. They weren't just watching me, they were studying me. There was a consciousness behind them that I can't explain. I haven't told anyone this story until now. Hannah would think I'd lost my mind. My friends would laugh it off. But I know what I experienced was real. I won't be going back to Mount Hood. Sometimes at night I still wake up thinking I hear those 3 knocks or that distinctive whistle. And I wonder if whatever was out there in those woods is still watching, still waiting. I don't know what they were, but they were real. They were intelligent, and they were not human. I'm writing this in hopes that someone out there has experienced something similar or can help me understand what happened, because right now I'm left with nothing but questions and the memory of those eyes watching me from the darkness. Story 2. I've been going back and forth on whether to post this for almost 2 decades. I'm not looking for attention, and honestly, I didn't even believe in this stuff before it happened. I just need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone out there has seen something similar. Back in September of 2004, I was 23 and living in northern Arkansas. I'd just bought a used 1989 Toyota pickup. Nothing fancy, just a forest green single cab with a little rust around the wheel wells, but solid mechanically. I was pretty proud of it since it was the first vehicle I'd bought completely on my own. My buddy Darren and I had been talking about taking it on some back roads to see how it handled off pavement. We were both into fishing and hunting and knew some decent spots along the White River about 30 miles south of Mountain View. There's a network of old logging trails through there, and most of them aren't on any maps. My grandpa used to take me fishing in that area when I was younger, so I knew a few good entry points. We headed out early that morning, probably around 7 a.m. It was a clear day, warm but not hot yet, typical September weather for the Ozarks. We packed a cooler with sandwiches and beer, tossed our fishing gear in the back, and hit the road. The drive down was uneventful, just shooting the shit about our jobs and complaining about the Razorbacks' last game. We got to the main Forest Service road around 8:30 and drove for another 15 minutes before I turned onto this narrow dirt trail I remembered. It wasn't much more than 2 tire tracks with grass growing in the middle, but it was passable. The truck was handling it like a champ, and I was feeling pretty good about my purchase. The trail wound through thick oak and hickory forest, going up and down these gentle ridges. We crossed a couple of dry creek beds that would have been impassable in the spring, but in September they were just gravelly dips. About 5 miles in, we came to this shallow creek, maybe 8 inches deep at the center. I shifted into 4WD and crossed it without any problem. The trail on the other side curved up a small hill, and at the top there was this clearing that overlooked a bend in the White River. It was gorgeous. The kind of spot you'd want to camp if it was legal. I parked on this flat area about 50 yards from the riverbank. We both got out to stretch our legs and take a leak after the bumpy ride. That's when I first noticed something was off. It took me a minute to put my finger on it, but the forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects buzzing, no wind in the trees. Nothing. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that's not normal. "You hear that?" I asked Darren. "Hear what?" he said, zipping up his fly. "Exactly. There's nothing." He stopped and listened for a second. "Huh, weird." I walked toward the front of the truck, and that's when I saw it. Across the clearing, back toward the creek we'd just crossed, something was standing at the tree line. It was partially shadowed by this massive old sycamore, but I could tell it was huge. At first, my brain tried to make it into a bear standing upright, but the proportions were all wrong. This thing was tall, way taller than any bear around here gets on its hind legs, and it was just standing there, watching us. It was covered in this thick, dark hair from head to toe. Not fur like a bear, more like hair, if that makes sense. It was blackish, maybe dark brown in places, but definitely dark. I froze. I'm 6'4", and whatever this was made me feel small. It was completely motionless, which somehow made it more terrifying. Just watching, observing. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. Probably only seconds, but it felt like minutes. "Darren," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off the figure. "Look over there by the big sycamore." Darren turned to look, and the moment he did, the thing moved. That's what convinced me it wasn't a bear or anything else I could explain away. The movement was smooth, deliberate, and fast, not lumbering like a bear. It crossed the trail in 2 or 3 strides and disappeared into the brush on the other side. It didn't crash through the underbrush like a startled animal. It just moved through it, almost silently. "What the fuck was that?" Darren whispered. "I don't know," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "But it was watching us." "Bullshit. It was probably just a deer," Darren said, but his voice was shaky. "Maybe a black bear." "When's the last time you saw a deer stand perfectly still on 2 legs?" I asked. "Or a bear move like that?" We stood there arguing in hushed voices for a couple minutes. Darren kept trying to rationalize it, but I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't like anything I could explain, and the silence of the forest around us was becoming increasingly unnerving. That's when we heard it. From the direction where the thing had disappeared into the brush came the sound of heavy, deliberate footfalls. Not running, not crashing around, just steady, heavy steps, moving in our direction. "We need to go," I said, already backing toward the driver's side door. "Now!" For once, Darren didn't argue. We both scrambled into the truck, and I fumbled with the keys, my hand suddenly clumsy with adrenaline. The engine caught on the second try, and as I threw it in reverse, I glanced in my rearview mirror. It was standing about 50 feet behind the truck, in full view now, not running toward us, not threatening us, just watching. And that's when I got my first real look at it. It was massive, taller than me by at least a foot, probably more. The shoulders were impossibly wide, like it would struggle to fit through a normal doorway. The hair or fur or whatever it was hung long and matted in places. Its build wasn't lean like a predator. It was solid, like a bulldozer. Thick chest, wide legs, arms that hung almost to its knees. I couldn't make out facial features clearly from that distance in the rear view, and honestly I didn't want to. The thing that stuck with me most wasn't its size, though. It was the way it stood, the posture. There was an intelligence there. This wasn't some animal that had stumbled across us. It knew exactly what we were, and it was assessing. I spun the truck around as fast as I could on that narrow trail, not caring if I ran over saplings or scraped against trees. Darren was pale, gripping the dashboard. "Jesus Christ," he kept saying. "Jesus fucking Christ." I drove back toward the creek way too fast for that trail, bouncing us around in the cab. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following us. The only thing I cared about was putting distance between us and that thing. When we hit the creek, everything went wrong. I was going too fast, and instead of easing through the water, I plowed into it. The front tires sank into the muddy bottom, and the engine died. We were stuck. "Start it! Start it!" Darren was yelling, twisting around to look out the back window. "I'm trying!" I cranked the key, and the engine turned over but wouldn't catch. "Is it coming?" "I don't see anything," Darren said, still looking behind us, "but I can't see much through the trees." I tried the engine again, and this time it caught. I shifted into 4 low and tried to rock us out of the mud, but the tires just spun. We were properly stuck. "We're going to have to push," I said, my stomach dropping at the thought of getting out of the truck. "Are you insane?" Darren hissed. "That thing is out there!" You want to sit here until dark? We're less than a mile from the main road. If we can get unstuck, we can make it. The logic was sound, but the thought of stepping outside made me physically ill. I didn't want to, but I couldn't see another option. I'll get behind the wheel, Darren said. You push. You're stronger. Part of me wanted to argue, but he was right. I had about 40 pounds on him. I'd be more effective pushing. Fine. I'll count to 3, then we both get out. You get in the driver's seat as fast as you can. I'll push. Don't stop for anything, you hear me? If you need to leave me, just go. Don't be dramatic, he said, but we both knew I wasn't. I counted down, and we moved as fast as we could. I didn't look around as I positioned myself at the back of the truck. I pushed with everything I had, feeling the mud sucking at my boots. The tires spun, throwing muck everywhere, and then suddenly caught. The truck lurched forward, almost knocking me over. I didn't wait to see if it was fully free. I sprinted around to the passenger side and jumped in before Darren had even shifted into first gear. Go, 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 I said, slamming the door. He didn't need to be told twice. We bounced and slid through the rest of the creek and up the opposite bank. I finally looked back through the rear window. I didn't see anything following us, just the empty trail and the trees beyond. Somehow that was almost worse. The idea that it could be there, just out of sight, watching us struggle. We didn't speak much on the way back to the main road. The silence between us was heavy with the awareness that whatever we'd seen didn't fit into our understanding of the world. When we finally hit pavement, the relief was overwhelming. You want to tell me what the hell that was? Darren finally asked as we headed back toward town. You saw it, I said. You know as much as I do. That wasn't a bear, he said quietly. No, it wasn't a bear. We stopped at a gas station about 10 miles away. I went inside to pay for gas and buy some water. My mouth was still cotton dry. When I came back out, Darren was examining the truck. There was mud caked everywhere underneath, and something was leaking. It turned out I'd cracked the oil pan when we crossed the creek too fast. It cost me nearly $800 to fix, but honestly, I'd have paid 10 times that to get away from that thing. The strangest part of all this is how people react when I've tried to talk about it. People around Mountain View and that part of Arkansas, they get quiet. They change the subject. A few have told me stories of their own, always in hushed voices, always making me swear not to repeat who told me. It seems like everyone there knows someone with a story, but nobody wants to be the one talking about it publicly. I've spent years trying to make sense of what I saw that day. I've read about Sasquatch and Bigfoot sightings, looked at blurry photos and questionable videos. Some seem credible, most don't, but none of them capture what I felt that day. The intelligence behind those eyes. The deliberate way it moved. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. It knew exactly what we were. It understood we were intruders in its territory, and it decided, for whatever reason, to let us go. I sold that truck 6 months later. Couldn't look at it without remembering. I've never gone back to that logging trail, and I never will. Darren and I don't talk about it anymore. We actually don't talk much at all these days. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, watching other people who wander too far down those old logging roads. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods and that unnatural silence falls, I find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a massive figure standing at the tree line, just watching, waiting. Story 3. I still can't sleep well. It's been over a year since that night in August 2009, but every time I hear something outside my window after dark, my heart stops. I've tried talking to people about it, my sister, a couple close friends, but they all give me that look. You know the one. The Catherine's lost her mind look. So I figured I'd write it all down here where people might actually believe me. We live in a pretty rural part of Mahoning County in Ohio. Our house sits on about 3 acres, surrounded by cornfields on 2 sides. Behind us is an empty field that stretches maybe 200 yards before it hits the woods. It's peaceful out here, or at least it was. That night started like any other summer night. It was hot, August in Ohio kind of hot, where the air feels like a wet blanket. We'd left the windows open, hoping to catch any breeze. My husband Dave fell asleep right away like he always does, snoring within minutes of his head hitting the pillow. I remember feeling jealous of how easily sleep came to him while I laid there listening to the crickets and occasional car passing on the distant road. I must have finally fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, I was wide awake. You know that feeling when something just jerks you out of sleep? Like your body knows something's wrong before your brain does. That's what happened. At first, I thought maybe it was just Dave moving around or the wind picking up, but then I heard it clearly, this weird scratching sound, then a distinct yanking noise, like someone trying to pull something open that was stuck. It was coming from outside. I glanced at the alarm clock, 2:37 a.m. The sounds continued. Scratch, scratch, pull, yank. It wasn't random like an animal might make. It seemed deliberate, like someone trying to get into something, our shed. That's what I realized I was hearing. Someone was trying to break into our shed. Now, our bedroom window faces the backyard where the shed sits, maybe 50 feet from the house. We keep it locked because we store tools and the riding mower in there. Recently, we'd been letting this stray cat and her kittens sleep in there too. I'd been feeding them, putting their bowls inside the shed at night to keep raccoons from getting to it. I sat up in bed and moved to the window, careful not to make noise. The moon was pretty bright that night, and we always leave a couple exterior lights on, just regular porch lights with those yellow bug bulbs. Not super bright, but enough to see the yard and shed. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing at our shed, no, not standing, working at our shed, was something. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a bear. It was something I still can't fully explain. It was trying to pull open the shed doors. The thing was yanking on the handles, and I could see its hand wedged between the doors. I could literally see its thumb sticking out, trying to pry the doors further apart. The creature was about 4 or 5 feet tall, not huge, but muscular, compact, and it was covered in hair. Not fur exactly, more like hair, dark, maybe black or brown, hard to tell in the dim light. And it was standing on 2 legs, completely upright, working those doors with purpose. I froze, afraid to move. I was convinced if I made any sound it would hear me. I remember my mouth going completely dry, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would hear that too. Then it happened. The thing stopped pulling at the doors and turned its head. It looked over its shoulder, directly at my window. I ducked down a bit but kept watching. I couldn't look away. Even though it was dark and I was inside, I had this overwhelming feeling that it knew I was watching it. It went back to working on the doors, but now it would occasionally turn and look toward my window again, like it was checking if I was still there. Each time it looked, I felt more exposed, more vulnerable, even though I was inside my locked house. I needed to see better. I needed to know what I was really looking at. Maybe it was just some weird possum or raccoon that looked strange in the poor light. Maybe my sleep-addled brain was playing tricks. I carefully backed away from the window and crept out of the bedroom, down the hall to our back door, which has a big window in it. From there, I'd have a clearer view of the shed. When I got to the door, I could still see the thing working at the shed. My hand hovered over the light switch for the back porch. If I turned it on, I'd see better, but it would also know for sure I was watching. I took a deep breath and flipped the switch. The yellow light flooded the back porch and part of the yard. The creature instantly whipped around, facing me directly now. Its eyes caught the light and reflected back a bright yellow, like a cat's eyes, but larger. Much larger. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Those eyes were wide, alert, intelligent. This wasn't some animal acting on instinct. There was awareness there, recognition. Then it moved. Jesus Christ, how it moved. 1 second it was at the shed. The next it was bounding toward the field behind our property. It ran on 2 legs, but not like a person runs. It was faster, more fluid. It covered the distance to the field in just a few long strides. Its left arm swung backward as it ran, and I noticed how unnaturally long that arm seemed, longer than its right, or at least it swung farther back. The whole thing couldn't have taken more than 5 or 6 seconds before it disappeared into the tall grass at the edge of the field, heading toward the woods. I slammed my hand against the wall, hitting the lock button for the door even though it was already locked. I ran back to our bedroom, flipped on the light, and shook Dave awake. "Dave! Dave, wake up!" There was something outside. He sat up, groggy and confused. "What? What's wrong?" I was talking so fast I'm not sure he understood everything I said. I was shaking, pointing toward the window, trying to explain what I'd seen. He got up and looked outside, but by then there was nothing to see, just our quiet backyard, the shed, the empty field beyond. It was trying to get in the shed, I kept saying. It had hands. It had a thumb. It was looking at me. Dave checked the doors and windows, then went outside with a flashlight and his baseball bat. I begged him not to go, but he insisted. When he came back in, he said the shed doors were still locked, but there were scratch marks around the handles that hadn't been there before. "Probably raccoons," he said, trying to calm me down. "They can be pretty determined when they smell food." I didn't argue, but I knew what I saw wasn't a raccoon. Raccoons don't stand upright at 5 feet tall. They don't have long arms that swing behind them when they run. They don't look at you with intelligent eyes that seem to say, "I see you seeing me." It took hours for me to calm down enough to talk rationally. By morning, as sunlight filled our room, I started to doubt myself. Had I dreamed it? Had my eyes played tricks on me in the dark? But then I remembered something. The cat food. We'd been keeping that mama cat and her kittens in the shed at night. There was always cat food in there. And while I hadn't left any deer food out that particular night, I regularly did leave corn and apples out for the deer near the shed. Whatever that thing was, it knew there might be food in that shed. Over breakfast, Dave mentioned something that made my skin crawl. A couple weeks earlier, he'd thought he heard something outside at night but figured it was just raccoons or possums. He hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want to worry me. "How long has this been going on?" I asked him. He shrugged. "Maybe a month? Just noises here and there. A month. For a month that thing might have been coming around our house while we slept. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd interrupted its routine that night, that it had been coming to our shed regularly, maybe even getting inside somehow, and I'd caught it in the act." That day, Dave reinforced the shed locks and installed a motion sensor light. I called my sister and told her what happened, but I could tell from her voice she thought I was overreacting to a raccoon or maybe a neighbor's dog. A week after it happened, 2 investigators from some research group came out to our property. Dave had found them online after I kept insisting what I saw wasn't a normal animal. They walked our property, took pictures of the scratch marks on the shed, and asked a lot of questions about wildlife in the area. They pointed out things I hadn't even thought about. How our location is perfect for something that wanted to stay hidden. We're surrounded by small family farms with plenty of corn, gardens, fruit trees. There's a big reservoir not far from here. Deer are everywhere. They said there would be plenty of resources to support. Well, they didn't come right out and say what they thought it was, but they hinted. One of them asked if I'd ever heard of Bigfoot sightings in Ohio. I laughed. I actually laughed. Bigfoot wasn't what I saw. This thing was too small, too agile, but they explained that younger ones or females might be smaller, might move differently than what people expect. I don't know what I saw that night. I really don't. But I know it wasn't normal, and I know it wasn't my imagination. It's been over a year now, and I haven't seen it again. But I've changed my habits. I don't leave the windows open at night anymore, no matter how hot it gets. We installed security cameras. I don't go outside after dark if I can help it. Sometimes when I'm in the kitchen washing dishes, I find myself staring out at that shed, at the field beyond it, at the line of trees in the distance. And I wonder if it's out there, watching our house, waiting for another opportunity. The mama cat and her kittens live in our garage now. We don't use the shed much anymore. Just last week, Dave said he thought he heard something outside at night. We both pretended it was probably just the wind, but I know better, and I won't be caught off guard again. I still don't know what that thing was. I don't know why it was so interested in our shed, but I know what I saw, and I know those eyes saw me too. Story 4. I don't talk about what happened that night in March 2005. Most people I've tried to tell either think I'm crazy or making it up for attention, but I know what I saw, and it still gives me nightmares almost 20 years later. I was watching my sister's baby that evening at our family home in Polk County. Our house sits right at the edge of the Big Thicket National Preserve in Texas. It's beautiful during the day, but once night falls, that endless stretch of trees becomes something else entirely. Growing up there, I'd heard all the local legends, wild men, strange lights, unexplained noises, but I never took them seriously until that night. It was around 8:30 p.m. Little Amy was finally asleep in her portable crib, and I was getting ready to watch some TV in my bedroom. The blinds were still open, and it was pitch black outside. I remember feeling suddenly uneasy about the darkness pressing against the window. You know that feeling when you think someone's watching you? It was like that, but 100 times worse. I got up to close the blinds, not because I saw anything, just because the darkness was making me uncomfortable. After pulling them shut, I checked on Amy, who was sleeping peacefully. She looked so tiny and helpless. I remember thinking how quiet the house was with Mom in the living room, watching her shows, and me alone with the baby in my room. When I turned back toward the window, my heart literally stopped. There was a gap in the blinds where they didn't quite meet, maybe half an inch wide, and through that tiny gap I could see something looking in at me. Not someone, something. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was just a large, dark shape taking up most of the window. But then I focused on what was visible through that small gap in the blinds. An eye. The most terrifying eye I've ever seen in my life. Large, dark, almost perfectly round. No whites visible at all. It was studying me, watching me, and it was positioned way too high to belong to any person. I froze. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. It felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. The eye didn't blink or move away. It just kept staring. That's when I noticed more details. The skin or fur or whatever it was around the eye was black and hairy, not like human hair, but coarser, wilder. My instincts finally kicked in. I lunged for Amy, scooped her up from the crib, and ran out of the room so fast I banged my shoulder hard against the doorframe. The pain didn't even register. I burst into the living room where my mom was watching TV. "There's something outside my window," I gasped. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold Amy. "Something's looking in the window." Mom jumped up, but she didn't believe me at first. She thought I'd seen a deer or maybe a bear, though bears are pretty rare in our part of Texas. But she must have seen the terror on my face, because she grabbed the phone and called my brother-in-law, Jack. "Just stay away from the windows," she kept saying, locking the doors and pulling all the curtains closed. We huddled in the living room, jumping at every little sound from outside. Amy was crying by then, probably sensing how scared we were. It took Jack almost 45 minutes to get to us. He brought his co-worker Mike with him. I was still shaking, holding Amy close to me and sitting in the middle of the couch, as far from any windows as possible. "What exactly did you see?" Jack asked me. I tried to explain, but I couldn't find the right words. "How do you describe something you've never seen before?" "It was big," I said. "Really big. And black. Hairy. And its eyes." I couldn't continue. Jack and Mike decided to check outside. As soon as they opened the front door, they both recoiled. "Jesus Christ, what is that smell?" Mike said, covering his nose. I hadn't noticed any smell from inside, but they described it as rotten, like something had died, but more musky. like wet animal fur combined with decay. They grabbed flashlights from Jack's truck and started walking around the property. I watched from the window as their lights bobbed around in the darkness. Mom stayed with me and Amy, keeping all the lights on inside. After about 20 minutes, Jack and Mike came back inside. They looked tense. "Did you see anything?" Mom asked. "No," Jack said, "but we heard something on the east side of the house where there are no outdoor lights. When we walked toward the tree line, we could hear it moving away from us, stepping on twigs and branches." "What do you mean, it?" Mom asked. "Whatever was out there was big," Mike said quietly. "Too heavy to be a deer or coyote. When we tried to follow the sounds, it kept retreating deeper into the woods, always staying just beyond where our flashlights could reach." I started crying then. Not sobbing, just silent tears running down my face. They believed me. Something had been out there. They kept asking me questions, trying to get more details about what I'd seen. I was in shock. My face felt cold and numb, and I couldn't stop my hands from trembling. Mom said later that I was pale as a ghost, and my eyes looked distant, like I wasn't fully there. "Megan, this is important," Jack said, kneeling in front of me. "Can you tell us exactly what you saw? Any details you remember?" I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memory, but it was burned into my brain. "It was standing to the side of the window," I said slowly. "Not directly in front, but sort of bent over to look in. I could see its left shoulder. It was massive, covered in black hair, except around the mouth and eyes. The skin underneath was dark, too, almost black." I remembered another detail. I could see one ear on the left side. It was small, almost human-like, but partially covered with hair. And the eyes, I shuddered. They were huge and completely dark. No whites at all, just black. "Like a person's eyes?" Mike asked. I shook my head. "No, nothing like a person. The closest thing I can think of is maybe a gorilla, but not really. I've never seen anything like it." Jack and Mike exchanged glances. "How tall do you think it was?" Jack asked. I thought about where the window was positioned. "My window is pretty high off the ground. Whatever it was looking down into the window. Maybe 7 feet tall, maybe more." They stayed with us that night. Nobody slept. We kept all the lights on and took turns watching. Nothing else happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching and waiting. The next day, Jack came back with some friends. They measured the height of my window and compared it to Jack standing outside. Based on where I'd seen the creature's eye, they confirmed it would have been at least 7 feet tall. That's when Mom decided enough was enough. Over the next few weeks, they cleared a lot of the thicket around our house, burning back the dense vegetation to create a buffer zone between us and the woods. Dad installed motion sensor lights all around the property, but I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I slept on the couch for months after. Eventually, I moved to another bedroom on the opposite side of the house, but I still checked the windows multiple times before going to bed. I never leave the blinds open after dark. Ever. I still don't know what was looking in at me that night. Some people around here talk about Bigfoot sightings in the big thicket, but what I saw didn't match the descriptions I've heard. This wasn't some gentle forest giant. The intelligence in those eyes was predatory, calculating. It was studying me and Amy like we were prey. The worst part is the uncertainty. Did it want to get in? Was it curious? Hungry? Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced it's standing outside my window again, just waiting. On windy nights, when the branches scrape against the side of the house, I freeze, thinking it's returned. We still live in the same house. The cleared area around the property has grown back somewhat, but we keep it maintained enough to see if anything approaches from the woods. I've never seen the creature again, but sometimes, when I'm home alone and the house is quiet, I swear I can smell that strange, musky odor drifting in from outside. I don't go into the big thicket anymore, not even during daylight. Whatever lives in those woods saw me once, and I'm terrified that it remembers me, that it might come back someday to finish whatever it started that night. I've researched similar sightings in East Texas, trying to make sense of what happened. There are stories, more than you'd think, of similar encounters. The Big Thicket has always had strange legends. The locals call it the Devil's Playground for a reason. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just a bear, or maybe my imagination playing tricks. But then I remember those eyes staring in at me, intelligent and alien, and I know what I saw was real. It's been almost 2 decades, but I still haven't fully recovered from that night. I'm jumpy and anxious. I can't stand being alone in the house after dark. And windows, God, I hate windows at night. Even with curtains drawn, I can't shake the feeling that something might be on the other side, watching and waiting. I don't know why it came to our house that night, or why it seemed so interested in looking in at me and Amy. I don't know where it went, or if it's still out there. And honestly, I don't want to know. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. All I know is that something not human was watching us that night from the darkness of the Big Thicket. And sometimes, when I look out at those woods at dusk, I can't help but feel it's still out there, waiting for another chance to get close to us again. Story 5. I've never really told this story to many people. For the longest time, I kept it locked away because, honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get it off my chest. What happened that summer night in 1971 changed how I see the world forever. I was just a kid back then, 11 years old, growing up in Madison County, Georgia. Our house sat on about 2 acres of land, with woods behind us and an open field to one side. Nothing fancy, just a modest home with a big back porch where we'd spend summer evenings to catch whatever breeze we could in that Georgia heat. That particular night in July, my buddy Mike was sleeping over. Mum had agreed he could stay the weekend while Dad was away on a business trip to Atlanta. We'd spent the day doing what kids did back then, riding bikes, catching frogs in the creek, and building a fort in the woods that we swore would be the best one ever. It wasn't. By evening, we were worn out but still riding that sugar high from the cherry Kool-Aid Mom had made us. After dinner, we all went out to sit on the back porch. Mum had her favorite lounge chair, one of those metal folding types with the plastic webbing that always stuck to your legs when you were sweaty. Mike and I sprawled out on the porch floor, our backs against the wall of the house, talking about whatever 11-year-old boys talked about in 1971. Probably the latest Batman comic, or wondering if we could somehow get our hands on firecrackers. The sun had set about an hour earlier, but it wasn't completely dark yet. Just that deep blue twilight where everything gets kind of fuzzy around the edges. The chorus of crickets and frogs was deafening, the way it always is in rural Georgia summers. We had one of those yellow bug lights going, which cast everything in a weird glow and attracted every moth in the county. I remember Mom was telling us about how her garden tomatoes were finally coming in when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. I looked up at her, and her face had this weird expression. Not exactly scared, but like she was trying to make sense of something. "Terry," she said real quiet, "look over there by the fence line." The way she said it made my skin prickle. I followed where she was pointing, down toward where our property met the Hendersons' field. At first, I didn't see anything except the fence posts every few yards and the tall grass waving in the evening breeze. Then I saw it. About 150 yards away, moving along the edge of the field, was something I couldn't make sense of. It was big, way too big to be a person, and it was walking on 2 legs, but not like a human walks. It had this weird, lumbering gait, swinging its arms which looked too long for its body. The thing was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur, and even from that distance I could tell it was massively broad across the shoulders. My first thought, weirdly enough, wasn't fear. It was confusion. My brain kept trying to categorize what I was seeing into something familiar. A bear standing up. No, bears don't walk that far on 2 legs. A person in a coat? No way. It was July in Georgia, pushing 80 degrees even at dusk, and nobody's that big. Mike saw it too. I heard him suck in a breath next to me. "What is that?" he whispered, and I could feel him trembling beside me. The creature was moving away from us, heading toward the tree line at the far end of the field. It never turned around, never seemed to notice us sitting there frozen on our porch. But there was something deliberate about the way it moved, like it knew exactly where it was going. Then my brain finally caught up with what my eyes were seeing, and panic hit me like a baseball bat to the chest. I scrambled to my feet so fast I knocked over my glass of Kool-Aid, sending sticky red liquid all over the porch floor. Mike was already up, backing toward the door. "Mom!" I hissed, trying not to be loud even though the thing was too far away to hear us. "Mom, we need to go inside!" Mom was struggling with her lounge chair, trying to fold it up to bring it in. For some reason, she was fixated on not leaving it outside, like that mattered at all in that moment. The chair wasn't cooperating. The locking mechanism was stuck, and her hands were shaking too badly to work it properly. "Leave it, Mom!" I urged, my voice cracking with fear. "Just leave it!" Mike and I didn't wait. We bolted inside, slamming the screen door behind us. I ran straight to the kitchen window, which faced that direction, and peered out. Mike was right beside me, his breath fogging the glass. We could still see the creature, now almost at the tree line. It never broke stride, never looked back, just disappeared into the dark shadows of the woods. A few seconds later, Mom finally got inside, leaving her chair where it was. She locked the door behind her, something we rarely did out there in the country, and drew all the curtains. None of us said anything for what felt like forever. Finally, Mom broke the silence. "You boys saw that, right?" Her voice was shaky. "I'm not crazy." We both nodded, too scared to speak. The three of us huddled in the living room, with every light in the house turned on. Dad had the only gun, and he'd taken it with him to Atlanta. Not that I knew what good a gun would do against whatever that was. I don't remember much else from that night. I know we didn't sleep much. Mike and I pushed our sleeping bags into the corner of my bedroom, as far from the windows as possible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside made us jump. Mom checked on us at least 4 times during the night. When morning finally came, I half expected, hoped, really, that it had all been some weird shared hallucination. But Mom's face at breakfast told me it wasn't. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, and she kept glancing out the windows. After we'd picked at our cereal, Mom did something I didn't expect. She got up and said, "Let's go look." I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed not to go back outside, but curiosity eventually won out. The three of us walked down toward the fence line, keeping close together. It was a bright, sunny day, the kind where it's hard to believe anything scary could exist. When we got to the spot where we'd seen the creature walking, we all stopped short. The grass, thick, tall summer grass that usually sprang back overnight from footprints, was completely flattened in a path about 2 feet wide. Whatever had made that path was heavy enough to crush the grass stems so thoroughly that they hadn't recovered at all. Mom knelt down and touched the flattened grass, her hand shaking slightly. "Look at this," she said quietly. There weren't distinct footprints. The ground was too dry and hard for that. But there were places where the soil was disturbed, pushed down in oval depressions much larger than any human foot. Mike found something else. A clump of dark, coarse hair caught on a barbed wire fence post. Mom wouldn't let us touch it. She got a plastic bag from the house and carefully put the hair inside without handling it directly. I never found out what happened to that bag. Mom put it somewhere safe, but we never talked about it again after that day. It was like we made some unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. Dad came home the next day, and Mom never told him. When Mike's parents came to pick him up, we didn't say a word about what we'd seen. Who would believe us? We'd be the laughingstock of the county. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without my bedroom light on. I'd lie awake listening to every sound outside my window, terrified that whatever we'd seen would come back. I started making excuses not to play in the woods behind our house. The fort we'd been so excited about was left unfinished. Mom started keeping the doors locked all the time, even during the day, something that raised Dad's eyebrows, but he never questioned it. She also began closing all the curtains at dusk, saying it kept the house cooler, but I knew the real reason. By the time school started that fall, the immediate fear had faded somewhat, but I never felt the same about those woods. I never again felt that childhood sense of safety in our own backyard. Something had invaded my world and shown me that the rules I thought governed reality weren't as solid as I'd believed. As the years passed, I buried the memory. When friends would talk about Bigfoot or similar creatures, I'd get quiet. Sometimes I'd almost convince myself it was just a bear or some other normal explanation. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I kept this to myself for over 20 years. Even when I moved away from Madison County, went to college, got married, I never told anyone, not even my wife. It wasn't until 1993, at a cookout with some friends, when the conversation somehow turned to supernatural beliefs. "Terry," my buddy Dave asked me point blank, "do you believe in Bigfoot?" Everyone was looking at me, probably expecting me to laugh it off like they all had, but something in me broke open, and before I knew it, I was telling them everything. About that night on the porch, about the flattened grass, about the clump of hair Mom had collected. When I finished, there was this long silence. I could see most of them didn't believe me, though they were too polite to say so. But Dave, who'd known me for 22 years at that point, just nodded and said, "If Terry says he saw it, then he saw it. He'd never lie about something like this." That meant more to me than he knew, because he was right. I wouldn't make this up. What would be the point? I've spent a lot of time since then reading about similar encounters across the country. Some sound so familiar it gives me chills. I've learned that what we call Bigfoot has been reported by indigenous cultures long before Europeans arrived. I've learned that similar creatures have been spotted all over the world, not just in the Pacific Northwest where most people associate them, but I've never gone looking for proof. I don't need to join expeditions or watch those TV shows where people go hunting for evidence. I already know what's out there. I saw it with my own eyes. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that creature had turned around and seen us watching it. Sometimes I wonder if it did know we were there and simply chose to leave us alone. That thought is almost more unsettling than thinking it never noticed us at all. All I know for certain is that on a warm summer night in 1971, something impossible walked across our field, something that shouldn't exist according to everything I'd been taught about the world, and nothing, not science, not religion, not rational explanation, has ever been able to erase what I saw. To this day, I still can't sleep with the curtains open at night. I still can't shake the feeling that there are things out there just beyond the edge of the light that we're not supposed to know about. And sometimes, when I hear an unexplained sound in the woods, I find myself holding my breath, wondering if what I saw that night is still out there, walking through other people's lives, leaving them forever changed like it left me. Story 6. I've never really talked about this outside of a few close friends and that one interview I did about it. Even now, 25 years later, my hands get clammy typing this out. It happened in August 1998, and I still get nightmares sometimes. Back then, I was working as a wildlife biologist, studying mountain lion populations in Northern California. I was 29, in great shape, and had been backpacking solo for years. That summer, I decided to do a week-long trek through the Marble Mountain Wilderness in Klamath National Forest. It was partly for work, but mostly because I loved that area, remote, beautiful, and largely untouched. The first day went perfectly. Weather was amazing. Clear blue skies, around 75 degrees. I hiked about 12 miles, documenting wildlife signs and taking water samples from streams for later analysis. I spotted a couple of deer, some interesting bird species, and even caught a glimpse of what I thought might be a fisher, but I was so rattled that I'm not sure they came out well. I didn't stick around to investigate further. All I wanted was to get out of there. I hiked out that day, covering what should have been 3 days' worth of distance in a single brutal push. My feet were covered in blisters by the time I reached my car, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the fear that had driven me forward. For years, I told almost no one about this. Who would believe me? I was a scientist, for crying out loud. I dealt in observable facts, data, evidence. But what I experienced that night didn't fit into any scientific framework I knew. It wasn't until around 2008 that I finally talked to some investigators who were doing research on unexplained encounters in that region. They were the first people who didn't look at me like I was crazy. I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize what I saw. Could it have been a bear? No, it was definitely bipedal and moving in a way no bear could. A human prankster? Impossible. No human could climb that cliff at night without equipment or move that fast across such difficult terrain. Some other known animal? Nothing matches what I saw. The thing that still gets me, that still makes me wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, is the way it reacted when it noticed me. It seemed shocked, almost as surprised to see me as I was to see it. And then that scream before it ran even faster up the mountain. Was it calling out a warning? To what? There were moments during those long hours of listening to its calls from the peak that I was certain there were others out there, that they were coming for me next. I finished my contract with the wildlife department later that year and took a job in a different state. I've never gone back to Marble Mountain. I still backpack, still work in the field, but never alone, not anymore. And I always make sure to camp in places where I can see what's coming from every direction. I don't know what I encountered that night. I don't have a name for it, but I know what I saw was real. It was out there in those mountains, moving through the wilderness with a kind of terrible grace that no known animal possesses. And sometimes I wonder if it's still there, making those calls in the darkness, climbing impossible cliffs under the moonlight. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for years. Most people would probably think I'm making it up, or that my childhood memories are just distorted. But what happened that day at Pine Hollow Lake has haunted me for almost 30 years now, and I need to get it off my chest. This happened in the summer of 1992, when I was 8 years old. My family spent a couple weeks every summer camping at Pine Hollow Lake in northeastern Wyoming. It was this beautiful spot, surrounded by steep cliffs and thick pine forests. My dad loved it because it was remote enough that we usually had large sections to ourselves, especially during weekdays. That particular summer, my older brother Mark, 12, and sister Jenny, 14, were at that age where they were always looking for thrills. They discovered this spot where teenagers would jump from the cliffs into the deepest part of the lake. My parents would supervise, of course, but I was too scared to jump. I was always the cautious one. Instead, I loved exploring the trails around our campsite. I'd collect pine cones and interesting rocks or follow animal tracks to see where they led. My dad was super protective, though. He always made me wear this old silver whistle on a string around my neck. It was his from when he was a forest ranger in his 20s. He told me to blow it if I ever needed help or got scared. 3 short blasts was our family's emergency signal. "Just stay where you can hear us, Lily," he'd always say. "The forest can make you turn around without even realizing it." I remember that day so clearly. It was a Wednesday, I think. The sun was bright, and the air had that perfect summer warmth. After lunch, Mark and Jenny wanted to go cliff jumping again. My mom decided to go with them while my dad stayed behind to fix something on our tent that had ripped the night before. "Can I go explore, Dad?" I asked, already putting the whistle around my neck. He looked up from his work. "Okay, Lily, but stay close. I'll be right here if you need me. Back in 1 hour, got it?" I nodded eagerly and headed off down my favorite trail that followed the edge of the lake before turning into the woods. I remember humming to myself, stopping occasionally to examine interesting bugs or plants. The forest was alive with sounds, birds calling, squirrels chattering, the distant splashes and laughs from the cliff-jumping spot. I'm not sure exactly when things changed. I found some deer tracks and started following them. They were so fresh and clear in the soft dirt that I just kept going. The forest got thicker. The pines grew closer together, blocking more of the sunlight. I remember feeling excited rather than scared, like a real explorer on an adventure. But then I stopped and looked around. The trees all looked the same. The familiar sounds of the lake and my family were gone. I couldn't even hear the water anymore. The realization hit me suddenly. I had no idea which direction I'd come from. My heart started beating faster. I turned in a complete circle, trying to spot something familiar. But every direction looked identical, just tall pines and undergrowth. The excitement vanished, replaced by a crawling sense of unease. "It's okay," I whispered to myself. "Dad said to use the whistle if I got lost." I raised the whistle to my lips and blew 3 short blasts. The sound pierced through the trees, but when it faded, there was no response, just silence. I waited a minute and tried again. 3 more blasts. Nothing. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The birds had stopped singing. The rustling in the undergrowth had ceased. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. I checked my little Mickey Mouse watch. It was nearly 3:30 p.m. I'd been walking for over an hour. I decided to try to retrace my steps, following what I thought was my own trail back, but nothing looked familiar. The light was changing too, the afternoon sun no longer directly overhead, but slanting through the trees. Long shadows stretched across the ground. I knew I needed to find my way back before dark. I walked faster, occasionally blowing the whistle, hoping my dad would hear. The forest seemed to get thicker, the ground more uneven. I climbed a small ridge, thinking maybe I could see the lake from higher up. When I reached the top, I found myself looking across a small ravine to another ridge about 100 feet away. The forest opened up a bit here, allowing me to see further than I had been able to in the dense trees. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or maybe a dead tree. But then I realized it was standing on 2 legs on the opposite ridge. It was massive, taller than my dad, who was over 6 feet, and completely black. Not black like a bear's fur, but black like a shadow, like it was absorbing the light around it. I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, perfectly still. I couldn't make out any features except for its eyes, deep-set and gleaming in a way that made my stomach turn. They reflected the fading sunlight with a dull shine that didn't seem natural. The worst part was that it was staring directly at me. I knew it, I could feel it. Those eyes were fixed on me with such intensity that I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It wasn't curious like an animal might be. There was something cold and calculating in that stare, like it was sizing me up. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a bear standing up or a tall dead tree stump that my scared mind transformed into something sinister. But I know what I saw. It was watching me with intelligence, with purpose. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't work. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. The whistle hung heavy around my neck, but I couldn't bring myself to use it. Some primal part of me knew that making noise would be a mistake. So I just crouched down, making myself as small as possible, and prayed. I prayed for my dad to find me. I prayed for the thing not to see me. I prayed for it all to be a bad dream. Time stretched in a way I can't explain. The forest grew darker. The temperature dropped. And still, that thing didn't move. It just kept watching me with those awful eyes. I don't know how long I stayed there, paralyzed with fear. It felt like hours. The shadows lengthened. I was shivering, partly from cold, partly from terror. Tears streamed silently down my face. I thought about my family. Would they find me? Would they know what happened if that thing took me? And then, I'll never forget this moment. I felt hands grab me from behind. I almost screamed, but a familiar voice whispered urgently in my ear, "Keep your eyes shut. Don't say a word." It was my dad. His arms wrapped around me, picking me up in one swift motion. I buried my face in his shoulder as he turned and started running. I could feel his heart hammering in his chest, his breath coming in hard gasps as he sprinted through the forest, carrying me. He didn't stop. Not once. He just kept running, his arms tight around me. I wanted to ask about the thing on the ridge, if he had seen it too, but I remembered his instruction to stay quiet, so I kept my eyes squeezed shut and my mouth closed. I don't know how long he ran. Eventually, the sounds of the forest returned. Birds, insects, the distant lapping of water on the lakeshore. Only then did he slow down, his pace becoming a careful walk rather than a desperate sprint. When we finally reached our campsite, it was almost completely dark. My mum was there with Mark and Jenny, along with several other campers I didn't recognize and 2 rangers with flashlights. Mum burst into tears when she saw me, rushing over to wrap us both in a hug. "Oh my God, Richard, you found her," she kept saying over and over, her voice breaking. I learned later that I'd been missing for nearly 8 hours. The entire campground had been searching for me. My family was frantic. They'd been about to call in a helicopter search when my dad found me. That night, after everything calmed down and my siblings were asleep, I heard my parents talking quietly outside our tent. I crept to the entrance and listened. "What happened out there, Richard?" my mom asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." There was a long pause before my dad answered, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it. "I followed her tracks to that northern ridge system," he said, "the one that borders the old mining property. I was calling for her, using my whistle. Then I felt something watching me." Another pause. "I've spent my whole life in forests, Karen. I know what it feels like when a bear or mountain lion has eyes on you. This wasn't that. This was different." "What do you mean?" My mom's voice had dropped to a whisper too. "I saw Lily crouching on the ridge, and across from her there was something else, something watching her." "A bear?" "No." The certainty in my dad's voice made my skin crawl. "It wasn't a bear." "Then what was it?" "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it before, but I knew we needed to get away from there. Fast." My mom must have heard the fear in his voice because she didn't press him further. They sat in silence for a while before coming back into the tent. The next morning, my dad took me for a walk along the lakeshore. Just the 2 of us. He knelt down to my level and asked me to tell him exactly what happened. When I described the black figure with the gleaming eyes, he didn't laugh or tell me it was just my imagination. He just nodded, his face serious. "Lily," he said finally, "sometimes there are things in this world we can't explain, things that don't make sense. What you saw yesterday—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It wasn't a bear. I saw it too. But I don't know what it was. He made me promise not to talk about it with Mom or my siblings. It would just scare them," he explained, "and they might not understand." We left Pine Hollow Lake the next day, cutting our vacation short. My dad never took us back there again, and he never let me wander alone in the woods after that, not even in the forest preserve near our home. For years, I tried to convince myself it was just a bear, or maybe even a person in dark clothes. But those eyes, they weren't animal eyes, they weren't human eyes either. They were cold and heavy and ancient somehow, and the stillness of it. No animal stands that perfectly still for that long. I'm 38 now, with children of my own. My dad passed away last year from cancer. In his final weeks, when it was just the 2 of us in his hospital room, I finally asked him about that day again. "Dad, do you remember what happened at Pine Hollow Lake? What we saw?" He was weak, his voice barely more than a whisper, but his eyes focused sharply at the mention of it. "I've spent my whole life in the wilderness, Lily," he said. "I've encountered bears, wolves, mountain lions. I know the feeling of being watched by a predator, but what was watching you that day?" He shook his head slightly. "It knew you were there. It was waiting, calculating. No animal thinks that way." "Then what was it?" I asked, the same question my mother had asked all those years ago. He looked at me for a long moment, then out the window at the darkening sky. "Some places in this world are old, Lily, older than we can understand. And sometimes I think they keep things we're not supposed to see." That was the last time we spoke of it. He died 3 days later. I still have nightmares about those eyes watching me from across the ravine, about what might have happened if my dad hadn't found me when he did. I've researched local folklore from that region of Wyoming, looked into Native American legends, even read about unexplained disappearances in national parks. Nothing quite matches what we saw. All I know is that something was watching me that day. Something that didn't belong in our world. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I still get that feeling of being watched. That's why I never let my kids wander out of sight when we're camping. That's why I always keep them close, because I know what's out there in the dark places of the world. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've felt its gaze follow me ever since. Story 8. I still remember everything like it was yesterday, even though it's been almost 40 years now. I've never really told the full story to anyone except my wife, and even she thinks I'm exaggerating. But I swear on everything I care about, what happened to me in Lincoln County, Tennessee, back in the 80s was real. I wasn't on drugs, I wasn't making it up for attention, and I wasn't seeing things. I know what I saw. It started in the summer of 1980. I was 9 years old, and my little sister Amber was 7. We lived in this old farmhouse with a huge backyard that backed right up to hundreds of acres of woods. Our parents both worked long hours, so during summer break we'd entertain ourselves all day. Mom's only rule was be home before dark, which we sometimes pushed to the absolute limit. Those woods were our playground. We knew every trail, every tree, every creek. About a quarter-mile in, there was this deep ravine, maybe 15 feet down, with a small stream at the bottom. We'd found these thick vines hanging from the trees, and we'd swing across the ravine like little Tarzans. It was stupid and dangerous looking back, but when you're a kid, you don't think about falling and breaking your neck. That day in July started like any other summer day. After lunch, Amber and I headed into the woods to our swing spot. I went first, showing off as usual, swinging back and forth a few times before jumping to the other side. Amber was more cautious. She grabbed the vine, but as she swung, her hand slipped, and she fell about halfway across, landing hard at the bottom of the ravine. I scrambled down to her, terrified she was seriously hurt. She was crying, but okay, just scraped up hands from trying to catch herself on the rocks. I helped her climb back up, and that's when we first heard it, heavy footsteps crunching through the leaves in the ravine to our right. It sounded way too heavy to be a deer. "We should go home," I whispered to Amber, who was still sniffling. I put my arm around her shoulders, and we started walking back toward our house. That's when I felt it. Something was following us. I could hear it moving through the woods parallel to us, stopping whenever we stopped, moving whenever we moved. "Jason, what's that noise?" Amber whispered, gripping my arm tight enough to hurt. "Probably just a deer," I said, but I knew it wasn't a deer. Deer don't follow you. Deer don't match your pace and stop when you stop. About halfway home, there was this small cliff, maybe 6 feet high, that we had to climb to stay on our usual path. I helped Amber up first, then climbed up myself. Standing on that ledge, I felt a weird urge to look back into the woods. Amber was already walking ahead, and I told her I'd catch up in a second. I crept back toward the trees, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I don't know what possessed me to do it, just stupid kid curiosity, I guess. I moved about 10 feet into the woods, and that's when I saw it. It was on its hands and knees, partly hidden behind a fallen log. At first I thought it was another kid, because it seemed about my size from that position, but it was covered in dark brown hair. Not like fur exactly, more like really shaggy human hair. Its arms were too long, way longer than they should have been for its body. Then it turned its head and looked right at me. Its face wasn't quite human, but wasn't like any animal I'd seen either. Its eyes were deep-set, dark, and aware. That's the only way I can describe it. There was intelligence there. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it grabbed a sapling with one hand and started pulling itself upright. I didn't wait to see how tall it would stand. Pure adrenaline hit me like a truck, and I ran faster than I ever had in my life. I reached the ledge and just jumped off, not even bothering to climb down. I crashed right into Amber, knocking her over. "Run!" I screamed, pulling her up and practically dragging her the rest of the way home. I kept looking back over my shoulder, but I didn't see it following us out of the woods. When we got home, Amber was crying again, mad at me for pushing her. I never told her what I saw. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe a 9-year-old kid claiming he saw some hairy creature in the woods? They'd just say it was my imagination or I'd seen a bear, even though there hadn't been bears in our area for decades. For the rest of that summer, I wouldn't go back into those woods unless Dad was with us. By the next summer, I'd convinced myself that maybe it had been a bear. Or maybe I'd made the whole thing up. Kids' memories are weird like that, but I never forgot those eyes. 4 years passed. I was 13 in 8th grade, and had mostly pushed the memory aside. We still lived in the same house, but I rarely went deep into the woods anymore. I'd made friends with Tommy, who lived in the house behind ours. Our backyards were separated by about 200 yards of woods, with a ridge running between our properties. It was October 1984, a Friday night. Tommy was staying over, and we were up late playing Atari in my bedroom, which had windows facing the backyard and woods. Around midnight, Tommy noticed something weird. "Hey, what's shaking those trees?" I looked out and saw the tops of several trees moving on the ridge behind our house. It wasn't windy that night, dead calm actually, but these trees were swaying like crazy. "Probably just some deer," I said, but even as I said it, I remembered that feeling from years earlier. "Let's check it out," Tommy said with that stupid teenage fearlessness. I didn't want to, but I also didn't want to look scared in front of my friend, so we snuck out the back door, grabbed the flashlights from the garage, and started walking toward the ridge. The closer we got, the more my stomach knotted up. I kept hearing that voice in my head saying, "Turn around, turn around." But Tommy was already charging ahead. We were about 50 yards from the ridge when we heard it, a deep, guttural howl that didn't sound like any animal native to Tennessee. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote or even a bear. It was lower, more powerful, and it echoed through the trees. Tommy's flashlight beam froze, and I watched as 2 small trees at the top of the ridge started violently shaking, like something massive was pushing them back and forth. Tommy's face in the flashlight glow was pure white. "What the fuck is that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, there was a loud snap as one of the trees broke, and we heard heavy movement coming down the ridge toward us. We didn't say a word, just turned and sprinted back to my house, practically falling through the back door and locking it behind us. We sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, telling my confused mum that we thought we'd seen someone in the woods. Dad got his shotgun and went to check, but found nothing. Tommy and I never talked about what we heard that night, like ever. By Monday at school, it was like it never happened. When I tried to bring it up once, he just changed the subject, and I could tell by his face he didn't want to remember it. The third time was during my freshman year of high school, fall of 1985. My parents had finally decided I was old enough to stay home alone after school until they got off work. Our bus stop was about half a mile from our house, and the quickest route home was this old, abandoned railroad track that ran parallel to the woods. For a few weeks, I kept getting this feeling while walking home that something was watching me from the trees. You know that prickly feeling on the back of your neck? Like that, but stronger. Sometimes I'd hear branches breaking or leaves rustling that didn't match up with the wind. One Wednesday afternoon in November, I decided to find out what was following me. Instead of walking home, I climbed up on this big boulder beside the tracks, where I could see into the woods, but still be in the open where nothing could sneak up on me. I waited there for about 20 minutes, just scanning the tree line. Then I saw it. About 100 yards into the woods, moving parallel to the tracks, was a figure. It was walking upright, at least 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders. It had dark blonde hair covering its body, not as dark as what I'd seen as a kid. It moved smoothly through the trees, ducking under branches, stepping over logs with purpose. It was following the exact route I took home every day. I sat completely still, barely breathing. It stopped and seemed to look around, like it had lost track of me. It never came out of the woods onto the tracks, and after a few minutes it turned and moved deeper into the forest until I couldn't see it anymore. I ran all the way home after that and begged my mom to pick me up from the bus stop from then on. I told her I'd seen a homeless man in the woods following me. She agreed, thank God, and that was the end of my walks along the tracks. The last encounter happened in the fall of my sophomore year, 1986. I was 16 and had started hunting with my dad and uncle. That November, during deer season, Dad let me go out alone for the first time. I had my own .30-30 rifle and had passed all the safety courses. I decided to hunt in a spot about a mile from our house, deep in the woods, where we'd seen a lot of deer sign. I got to my spot before dawn and set up in a natural ground blind between some fallen trees. Perfect visibility, good cover, quiet approach. I'd done everything right. As the sun rose, the woods came alive with normal sounds. Birds, squirrels, the occasional distant woodpecker. I sat perfectly still for hours, just like Dad had taught me. Around 10 a.m. the woods went silent. Every hunter knows what that means. Something is moving through that doesn't belong. I raised my rifle, thinking a buck was finally coming in. But the sound was wrong. Instead of the delicate steps of a deer, I heard what sounded like multiple sets of feet walking down the ridge toward me. 2 smaller ones and 1 much heavier set. They weren't trying to be quiet, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, even what sounded like low grunts or mumbling. My heart was racing, but I stayed perfectly still. I could tell from the sound that whatever was coming was about 80 yards away and heading straight for me. Then suddenly, the noises stopped. There was a different sound, sniffing like when a dog catches a scent. Then the footsteps changed direction, deliberately moving to skirt around my position by at least 50 yards. They knew I was there. They smelled me or sensed me somehow, and they were intentionally avoiding me. I should have been relieved, but instead, I felt a cold fear like nothing I'd experienced before. I was being assessed and avoided by something intelligent that didn't want to be seen. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then packed up and hiked out a different way than I'd come in. I never hunted alone after that. I never told my dad why. That was my last direct encounter, but not the end of the weird experiences. Throughout high school, we'd occasionally find strange prints in the mud near our house after heavy rains. Too big for a person, shaped wrong for a bear. Once, all the apples from our backyard tree disappeared overnight, with the higher branches broken like something tall had reached up and stripped them. I've had nearly 4 decades to think about what I experienced in those woods. I'm not crazy, and I know what bears and other wildlife look like. What I encountered in Lincoln County wasn't something that was supposed to be there. I moved away for college and never moved back, though my parents stayed in that house until they passed. When I visit now and drive by those woods, I still get that same feeling on the back of my neck. Whatever was in those woods is probably long gone. But sometimes I wonder, how many other kids had encounters they never told anyone about? How many other people in Lincoln County have stories they're afraid to share? I don't have any photos or proof, just the memories that have stayed crystal clear, while other childhood experiences have faded. Sometimes I wish I could go back and set up trail cameras or bring a video recorder, but another part of me is glad I never had to confirm what I already know. Those woods weren't empty, and whatever lived there was watching us long before we ever noticed them. Story 9. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened last summer. It's been almost a year, and I've told this story to exactly 3 people: my girlfriend, my brother, and one buddy who's into weird forest stuff. They all had different reactions, but none of them straight up called me crazy, which I appreciate. I figured maybe writing it all down might help me process it. Plus, if anyone else has seen something similar near Cedar Ridge, Montana, maybe we can compare notes. So my dad and I have this thing we do every summer where we go out into the wilderness for a few days. No fancy camping gear, just basic bushcraft stuff. Building shelters, making fires without matches, foraging, that kind of thing. My dad's been into this since before it was cool on YouTube, and he taught me everything I know. Last July, 2021, we decided to check out this spot about 30 miles outside Cedar Ridge. The area is pretty remote, mostly pine forest, with some small meadows scattered throughout. We'd heard it was beautiful, but rarely visited because it's hard to access without a decent 4x4. Perfect for what we wanted. We weren't total idiots, though. We had emergency supplies in the truck and told my mum exactly where we'd be. What I didn't know until we were driving out there was that the area had all these local Bigfoot stories. Dad started telling me about them on the drive, laughing about how the locals swore something lived in those woods. I rolled my eyes. My dad loves that kind of stuff, always has. He subscribes to those cryptid podcasts and everything. I just figured it was him trying to make the trip more interesting. We got to our spot around 10 a.m. The forest was dense but beautiful. Tall pines, lots of undergrowth, perfect for testing our skills. We spent the day setting up a basic camp, practicing fire-starting techniques and identifying edible plants. Nothing fancy, but exactly the kind of day we enjoy. Dad was wearing this bright orange hunting vest. Not because we were hunting, but because he always wears it in the woods. Says it's safer that way, which I guess makes sense. Everything was totally normal until evening. Around 8 p.m., with the sun starting to set, we decided to pack up and head back to the truck. We'd left it about half a mile from our camp spot, parked in this little clearing off an old logging road. The walk back was through some pretty dense forest on what was basically just a game trail, narrow and winding through the trees. When we got back to the truck, Dad suddenly got this silly grin on his face. "Hey, I want to try something," he said, digging around in his backpack. He pulled out his phone and showed me this YouTube video he'd saved, some guy demonstrating different Bigfoot calls. I laughed and called him a dork, but he was already heading back down the trail we'd just come up. "I'll be back in 15 minutes, he called over his shoulder. "Just gonna try a few calls down by that creek we crossed." I could still see his bright orange vest as he disappeared down the trail. I didn't think much of it, just Dad being Dad. I figured I'd wait by the truck, maybe organize our gear. So there I was, leaning against our pickup, scrolling through my phone. We surprisingly had 1 bar of service. Enjoying the evening sounds of the forest. Birds were calling. There was a light breeze rustling the pine needles. All that peaceful nature stuff. But then, everything went quiet. And I mean everything. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Nothing. It happened so suddenly that I actually looked up from my phone, wondering if I'd gone deaf or something. The silence was heavy, like pressure on my eardrums. I'm not usually the jumpy type, But something about that silence made the hair on my arms stand up. I called out for my dad, but my voice sounded weird, too loud in the silence, yet somehow muffled at the same time. There was no answer. I started to get worried, so I walked to the edge of the clearing, where the trail disappeared into the trees. I could still see a bit of the trail as it wound down toward the creek, maybe 50-60 yards visible, before it curved behind some thick pines. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the fading light. Something massive moved from behind one tree to another, down where the trail bent around a large boulder. My first thought was bear, because what else could be that big? But as it moved more into the open, I realized this was no bear. This thing stood upright on two legs. It was huge, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were so broad they nearly touched the trees on either side of the narrow trail. The body was covered in dark, matted fur. Not just black, but the kind of black that seems to absorb light. The fur wasn't smooth like a bear's. It looked tangled with what seemed like pieces of bark or moss stuck in it. But what really froze me in place was what it was carrying. This thing had a log, like a proper log, at least 6 feet long and thick as a fence post, gripped in what I can only describe as hands. Not paws, hands. I stood there, completely paralyzed, watching as this creature repeatedly slammed the log against either the ground or maybe a tree. I couldn't see exactly what it was hitting. Each impact made a deep, resonating thud that I could actually feel through the truck behind me. It was like someone pounding a bass drum, but way more powerful, and the sound it made, Jesus. With each strike of the log, it let out this low, guttural grunt. Not a roar or a howl, more like the sound you might imagine coming from something massive exerting force, a deep, rumbling huh that carried through the silent forest. I watched this for maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a bear? No way. A person in a suit. Who the hell would be out here in a suit, and how could anyone move something that heavy so effortlessly? Finally, my brain kicked back into gear, and I fumbled for my phone to record what I was seeing. But in the few seconds it took me to pull up my camera app, the thing was gone. Just gone. The only evidence it had been there at all was the violent shaking of some branches and undergrowth about 20 yards to the right of where it had been standing, like it had moved off the trail and into the dense forest at incredible speed. I stood there, phone in hand, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Should I go after my dad? Should I call for help? Would anyone even believe me if I did? Before I could decide, I heard my dad's voice calling from down the trail. "Mark, you still up there?" His orange vest appeared around the bend, and I've never been so relieved to see anyone in my life. "Dad, did you see that? Did you see it?" I was practically shouting, pointing down the trail where the thing had been. He looked confused. "See what? I was down by the creek trying those calls. Didn't hear anything respond, though." "There was something there right where you're standing now. It was huge, Dad, like 8 feet tall black fur, and it was slamming a log against the ground." I could tell from his face he thought I was messing with him, getting back at him for all the Bigfoot stories he'd been telling on the drive up. "Very funny, Mark. Did you record this creature on your phone?" He was smiling, thinking I was pulling his leg. "No, I didn't get it. It moved too fast." Even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. Dad chuckled and patted my shoulder as he walked past me to the truck. "Good one, son. You almost had me there for a second." I tried to convince him I wasn't joking, described exactly what I'd seen, the size, the fur, the log, the sounds it made. He listened, but I could tell he wasn't buying it. Not completely, anyway. There was this little flicker of something in his eyes. Not quite belief, but not total dismissal either. "Tell you what," he finally said. "It's getting dark. Let's head back to the motel, get some sleep, and we can come back in the morning to look for tracks." I didn't want to leave. I wanted to go down that trail right then and show him where it happened, but it was almost dark, and even with flashlights, tracking anything would be nearly impossible. So we got in the truck and drove back to our motel in Cedar Ridge. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing standing there, methodically slamming the log against the ground. The sound of those impacts seemed to echo in my head. We went back first thing the next morning. Dad brought a tape measure and his camera, humoring me. We walked down the trail to where I'd seen the creature, and I showed him exactly where it had been standing, where I thought it had been hitting the log, and the direction it went when it disappeared. We searched for over 2 hours. No footprints, no broken branches, no disturbed ground where the log had supposedly been pounded. Nothing. Dad didn't say, "I told you so," but he didn't have to. His silence said enough. Eventually, he suggested we head home early, and I didn't argue. The forest felt different now, still beautiful, but somehow more aware, like it was watching us. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can describe it. On the drive home, Dad finally broke his silence. "You know, Mark, even if you did see something, it doesn't mean it was a Bigfoot or whatever." "Then what was it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Could have been a bear standing up. Could have been shadows playing tricks on your eyes in the evening light. Could have been your imagination after all those stories I told you." I didn't argue, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't carry logs and pound them against trees. It wasn't shadows or my imagination. It was real, solid, and deliberate in its actions. That's the part that still bothers me the most. Whatever that thing was, it seemed to be doing something intentional, like it was sending a message, like it wanted to be heard but not seen. Why else would it make all that noise but stay just far enough away to remain partially hidden? I've spent hours researching online since then. I've read every Bigfoot encounter story I could find, watched countless videos, listened to podcasts. Some descriptions come close to what I saw, but nothing quite matches. Most Bigfoot stories describe creatures that either run away or act aggressively toward humans. What I saw wasn't running away, and it wasn't being aggressive, at least not toward me. It was demonstrating something. I haven't been back to those woods, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. But I can't stop thinking about it. What was it? Why was it there? And why did it choose that moment to appear and then vanish? Dad and I still do our bushcraft trips, but we pick different locations now. He never brings up what happened, and neither do I. Sometimes I catch him looking at me when he thinks I'm not paying attention, and I wonder if he believes me more than he lets on. All I know is this. I saw something that day that I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist but does. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I swear I can still feel those impacts vibrating through the floor and hear that deep guttural grunt echoing in my head. Story 10. I've never shared this before. For over 20 years, I've tried to forget that evening, but the memory still makes my skin crawl. What happened on July 12, 1998, in Mill Creek wasn't something I could just brush off as my imagination. I was 16 that summer. Me and my two buddies, Chris and David, were bored out of our minds like most teenagers in our sleepy Washington suburb. We'd spent most of that Sunday hanging out at David's house, playing Nintendo 64 and watching bad cable TV. When the sun started going down, Chris got this stupid idea to scare our friend Jake. Jake was always jumpy, and Chris thought it'd be hilarious to tap on his bedroom window and freak him out. It wasn't even dark yet, maybe 8:30 or so, but that summer twilight was setting in. You know that weird blue-gray light that makes everything look different? The three of us rode our bikes over to Jake's neighborhood, which was about a mile away. His house backed up to this stretch of woods that ran behind several properties in the area. Not deep forest or anything, just a standard suburban wooded buffer that separated neighborhoods. Jake's yard had this 6-foot privacy fence around the back. We ditched our bikes in the empty lot next door and walked around to the side of his house. I remember feeling stupid about the whole thing. We weren't little kids anymore, but there we were, about to pull some dumb prank. Getting over the fence was easy enough. David went first, then helped pull Chris and me over. Jake's bedroom window faced the back of the yard, where it met those woods. There was maybe 40 feet of grass between his window and where the trees started. We crouched down by some bushes under his window, waiting for him to come into his room. The plan was to wait until he was in there, then scratch at the screen and make weird noises. We must have been waiting for about 5 minutes when Chris suddenly tensed up beside me. I remember asking what was wrong, but he didn't say anything. He just stared toward the trees with this look I'd never seen on his face before. I followed his gaze to the edge of the woods. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. Standing at the tree line was something massive. It was on 2 legs, but it wasn't a person, not even close. This thing was huge. I'm not exaggerating when I say it must have been at least 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were unnaturally wide, like a football player wearing massive pads, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms hung down way too low, almost to its knees. The whole thing was covered in this dark, matted hair, like a really dirty wet dog, but thicker. In the dim light, I couldn't make out a face exactly, but I could feel it looking at us. That's what freaked me out the most. Its eyes weren't reflecting light like an animal's would. They were aware, focused, intelligent. It was watching us with purpose. Nobody said anything. We all just froze. I remember feeling my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. My mouth went completely dry. I couldn't even swallow. The 3 of us stayed absolutely still, crouched there by Jake's window, staring at this thing. And it stared right back at us. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, it moved. It turned away from us, slowly, and started walking deeper into the woods. But it didn't run or bound away like a bear or deer would. It walked deliberately on 2 legs with these long, smooth strides. The way it moved was almost human, but not quite right. Too fluid, too controlled for something that size. Then it stopped, maybe 15 feet into the trees. It turned its upper body, just its torso, not its legs, and looked back at us over its shoulder. The movement was so human-like, but at the same time completely wrong. That's when it made the sound. I've tried for years to describe that sound accurately. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was this deep, rumbling growl that started low and built up. The crazy thing is, I didn't just hear it. I felt it, like a physical vibration in my chest cavity. It was primal and threatening, but also deliberate, like it was communicating something specific. When it growled a second time, louder and longer, we completely lost it. David whispered, "Go, go, go," and we scrambled toward the fence. I was so terrified I could barely coordinate my movements. My legs felt like jelly. Chris practically threw me over the fence, and I caught my jeans on one of the boards and tore a huge hole in the knee. I didn't even feel it happen. We ran to our bikes, fumbling with them, dropping them, picking them back up. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that thing was right behind us. We pedaled harder than I've ever pedaled in my life, not even taking the time to decide where to go. We just needed to get away from there. We ended up at this little park about 5 blocks away, all of us gasping for breath, our legs burning. Chris threw his bike down and just sat on the ground with his head in his hands. David kept saying, "What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?" over and over. I couldn't even speak. When we finally calmed down enough to talk, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. David suggested it was a bear, but we all knew bears don't stand and walk like that. Chris thought maybe it was some guy in a costume trying to scare people, but that didn't make sense either. It was too big. too fluid in its movements. And that sound, no human could make that sound. I remember Chris asking if we should tell someone. Tell who? Our parents would think we were making it up. The police would laugh at us. Plus, what would we even say? That we saw some kind of monster while trespassing in Jake's yard. We made a pact not to tell anyone, not even Jake. We'd sound crazy. But we also agreed to stay the hell away from those woods, especially at dusk. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. I'd be riding my bike home from a friend's house, and the hair on my neck would stand up for no reason. I'd turn around expecting to see something behind me, but there was never anything there. I started taking different routes home, avoiding any streets that ran along those woods. My bedroom was on the second floor of our house, and sometimes at night I'd wake up with this overwhelming urge to check the yard. I'd peer out my window into the darkness, scanning the trees at the edge of our property. I never saw anything, but the feeling was so strong it would keep me awake for hours. About a month after it happened, I finally worked up the courage to go back to that spot in the daytime with David. Chris refused to come. We stood outside Jake's fence, staring into those woods, trying to convince ourselves it had been a bear or some other normal explanation. But we both knew better. We found something that day that made my blood run cold. At the edge of the tree line, right where that thing had been standing, there was an area where the underbrush was crushed down, and there, pressed into the soft ground, was what looked like a footprint. Not a bear print, not a deer print, and definitely not a human footprint. It was huge, easily twice the size of my shoe, and shaped all wrong. It had 5 distinct toe impressions and was deeply pressed into the dirt. Like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. David and I never talked about it again after that day. When school started back up in the fall, Chris had convinced himself it was just a bear. He'd tell us that when we brought it up, but I could tell by the look in his eyes he didn't believe it. By Christmas that year, we had all silently agreed to pretend it never happened. We drifted apart during high school anyway, like friends often do. I moved away from Mill Creek after graduation and have only been back a handful of times to visit my parents. Every time I go back, I find myself looking at those woods differently than other people do. Where they see a peaceful stretch of trees, I see a place to avoid, especially at dusk. I've read accounts of Bigfoot sightings over the years, and some descriptions sound similar to what we saw. But none of them capture the intelligence I sensed in that thing's gaze. It wasn't just a wild animal. There was something else going on behind those eyes. Something that understood exactly what it was doing. The most unsettling part is that I don't think we stumbled upon it by accident. The way it stood there, watching us, it felt deliberate, like it wanted us to see it, like it was making itself known to us specifically. What haunts me most after all these years isn't the creature's size or appearance. It's the absolute certainty I felt in that moment that it could have easily caught us if it wanted to. It let us go. It let us see it, hear it, and then run away with our story that no one would believe. Sometimes I wonder if Jake ever experienced anything strange living next to those woods. I've thought about reaching out to him, but what would I say? Hey, remember that time we were spying on you and saw a monster? We haven't spoken in 20 years. I don't have any dramatic conclusion to this story. Nothing else happened that night. We didn't investigate further. We didn't become monster hunters. We were just 3 terrified teenagers who saw something we couldn't explain and did our best to forget about it. But on quiet nights when I'm alone, my mind still drifts back to those woods in Mill Creek. I still remember the sound of that growl vibrating in my chest, and I still wonder, if we hadn't run away, what would have happened next? Was it just passing through, or was it there for a reason? Did others see it too and stay quiet like we did? Whatever that thing was, it knew we were there. It looked right at us with those intelligent eyes, and sometimes even now when I'm walking alone at dusk, I get that same feeling of being watched. I'll turn around quickly, hoping to catch whatever it is that's looking at me. But there's never anything there. At least nothing I can see. Story 11. I've never really told anyone outside my family and the Carter boys about what happened that evening, back in July 1997. Whenever I try to explain it to someone new, I can see that look in their eyes, the one that says they think I'm either crazy or making it up, but I know what I saw. It's been 26 years, and I still get cold sweats thinking about those yellow eyes staring back at me from the darkness. I was 12 that summer. My parents had sent me and my siblings to stay with our grandmother in Ocolo for the week leading up to Independence Day. If you've never heard of Ocolo, I'm not surprised. It's barely a speck on the map of East Texas, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and most folks are related somehow if you go back far enough. My grandmother lived next door to the Carter family. They had 2 boys, Tommy and Lee, who were around my age. Tommy was 13 and Lee was 11. Their family owned about 10 acres of land, most of it covered in pine forest with this old, murky pond at the back of their property. The pond was maybe a 1/4 acre in size, with cattails growing around the edges and a rickety wooden dock that creaked when you walked on it. The afternoon of July 3rd was brutally hot and humid, the kind of thick air that makes your clothes stick to your skin. We'd spent most of the day shooting off firecrackers in the Carter's front yard, but as evening approached, Tommy came up with the idea of having a bottle rocket fight in the woods. His parents weren't home. They'd gone into town to pick up supplies for their barbecue the next day. So we raided their fireworks stash in the garage and headed out toward the pond. There were 6 of us in total. Me, my younger brother Jake, 10, my sister Melissa, 14, Tommy and Lee Carter, and their cousin Kevin, who was visiting from Houston. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple between the pine trees. The cicadas were screaming so loud you had to raise your voice just to be heard. We split into teams. Tommy, Jake, and Kevin went to the east side of the pond, while Lee, Melissa, and I headed to the west side. But then Melissa chickened out at the last minute, saying she was going back to the house because it was getting dark. That left just me and Lee to take on the other 3. "We should circle around the back of the pond," Lee whispered to me. "They'll never see us coming." It seemed like a good plan. We had our bottle rockets, a couple of lighters, and I had brought my flashlight, one of those heavy black mag lights that could probably knock someone out if you swung it hard enough. We started moving through the underbrush, being as quiet as possible. The woods were getting darker by the minute, and the shadows between the trees seemed to stretch and reach toward us. The backside of the pond was more overgrown than the rest. Thick bushes and brambles made it hard to move without making noise. Lee and I had to crouch down and push through slowly. The smell was different back there too, musty and earthy, with this weird, sour undertone that reminded me of the time I found a dead possum under our porch. We found a spot behind a fallen log, about 50 yards from the pond's edge, perfect ambush position. I could just make out Tommy's red t-shirt through the trees on the other side. We were getting ready to light our first rocket when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the quick light steps of one of the other kids trying to sneak up on us. These were deliberate, heavy footsteps that made the ground vibrate slightly beneath my hands. And there was breathing, deep, raspy breathing that sounded like someone with a terrible chest cold trying to inhale through a wet cloth. I froze. Lee must have heard it too because he stopped moving completely, his hands suspended in midair with the lighter. "What is that?" he whispered, so quietly I barely heard him. The footsteps got closer. Then came the sound of breaking branches. Not small twigs snapping underfoot, but thick undergrowth breaking under significant weight. Whatever was moving through the woods behind us was big. Really big. I wanted to believe it was just a deer, or maybe even a wild hog. There were plenty of both in the East Texas woods, but deer don't breathe like that, and even the biggest hogs don't snap branches that sound like baseball bats breaking. Lee's face had gone completely white in the fading light. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, my mouth suddenly bone dry. The footsteps stopped, maybe 15 feet behind us. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Instead, I slowly turned my head and raised my flashlight, finger hovering over the switch. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity? Some stupid childhood bravery? Whatever the reason, it's the moment that's been burned into my memory for all these years. I clicked the flashlight on and swung the beam toward the sound. At first, all I saw was a massive shape, taller than any man I'd ever seen. The light illuminated a broad chest covered in thick, greyish-brown hair. Not fur exactly, but long, matted hair that hung in clumps. The chest was at least twice as wide as mine, with muscles clearly visible beneath the hair. My hand was shaking so badly that the light beam bounced around, but I managed to tilt it upward toward where the head should be. That's when I saw the eyes, yellow-amber eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like a cat's or deer's might, but much, much larger. They were set in a face that was almost human, but wrong. The skin around the eyes was dark and leathery, with a prominent brow ridge that shadowed those glowing eyes. The nose was flat and wide, and what I could see of the mouth looked too big for the face, with the hint of teeth that seemed too sharp. But what really hit me, what still haunts me when I think about it, was the intelligence in those eyes. This wasn't some mindless animal. Whatever was looking at me understood what I was, and then it raised its hand. One massive, hair-covered hand with fingers that seemed too long, lifted up to block the light from its eyes. The gesture was so human, so deliberate, like someone annoyed by high beams on a dark road. Its fingers had to be 7 or 8 inches long, ending in thick, dark nails that looked more like claws. I dropped the flashlight. I didn't mean to. My fingers just stopped working. The light hit the ground and rolled, the beam shooting off uselessly into the trees. I heard Lee make a sound, not quite a scream, more like all the air being punched out of his lungs at once. Then we ran. I don't remember getting up or even making the decision to move. 1 second I was frozen in terror, staring at those yellow eyes, and the next I was crashing through the underbrush, branches slapping my face, my lungs burning. I could hear Lee right behind me, his breathing coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I don't know if the thing followed us. I never looked back. All I knew was that I had to get away from there, had to reach open ground, had to get back to the houses where there were lights and people and safety. We burst from the tree line near the dock, screaming at the top of our lungs. Tommy, Jake, and Kevin were still by the edge of the pond. They looked startled when they saw us, probably thinking it was part of our ambush plan, but something in our faces must have told them otherwise. "What's wrong?" Tommy yelled, suddenly serious. "Run!" was all I could manage between gulps of air. "Back to the house! Run!" They didn't ask questions. Maybe it was the raw terror in my voice, or maybe they caught a glimpse of something moving in the darkness behind us. Whatever the reason, they took off running too. All 5 of us sprinted across the Carter property, past their empty house, across their yard, and straight to my grandmother's place, where the porch light was on, and we could see her moving around inside through the windows. We pounded up her steps and burst through the front door, slamming it behind us and startling her so badly she dropped the plate she was drying. "Lord have mercy! What in God's name is the matter with you boys?" she demanded, clutching her chest. We all started talking at once, our stories tumbling out in a jumbled mess of something in the woods and huge and yellow eyes. Tommy and the others hadn't seen anything themselves, but had caught our fear like a contagion. My grandmother listened for about 30 seconds before holding up her hand for silence. "Now that's quite enough of that nonsense," she said firmly. "You boys have been scaring yourselves with stories and running around in the dark. There's nothing in those woods bigger than a white-tailed deer, and you all know it." "But Grandma, we saw it," I insisted, my voice cracking. "It was huge, and it had these eyes." "Ethan Brooks," she cut me off. using my full name in that way adults do when they're not playing around anymore. I've lived next to those woods for 40 years. Don't you think if there was some monster living back there, someone would have noticed by now? The Carter boys' parents got home about an hour later, and the whole scene repeated itself. Mr. Carter listened more patiently than my grandmother had, but in the end, he came to the same conclusion. We'd scared ourselves and let our imaginations run wild. He even walked out to the edge of the woods with a shotgun and a powerful flashlight to prove there was nothing there. "See, nothing but trees and critters," he announced when he came back. "Now you boys settle down and stop with these stories. You're scaring the younger ones." Jake and Kevin were pretty shaken up, more from our panic than anything they'd actually witnessed. By bedtime, even Tommy was suggesting that maybe Lee and I had seen a bear, though bears hadn't been common in that part of Texas for decades. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow ones staring back at me. I kept hearing sounds outside the window, branches scraping against the glass, the wind sighing through the eaves, and imagining that something was out there, watching the house, waiting. The next morning was July 4th. The adults were busy preparing for the neighborhood barbecue, and no one wanted to hear any more about our adventure from the night before. But I couldn't let it go. As soon as breakfast was over, I slipped away from the house and headed back toward the pond. I wasn't brave enough to go alone this time. I convinced Lee and Tommy to come with me, though Tommy made it clear he thought we were wasting our time. "If it's a bear, it'll be long gone by now," he said as we walked across their property. "And if it's not a bear, it was probably just a deer or something that looked bigger in the dark. But I knew what I'd seen, and I think Lee did too, though he'd been unusually quiet all morning." We reached the spot where Lee and I had hidden the night before. In the daylight, it looked so ordinary, just a fallen log in a patch of woods. I started searching the ground behind where we'd been. "What are you looking for?" Tommy asked, already sounding bored. "Tracks," I replied, pushing aside some ferns. It was standing right around. That's when I found them. Not tracks exactly, not like a clear footprint you could take a plaster cast of. The ground was too covered with pine needles and leaf litter for that. But there were deep gouges in the dirt, 4 of them in a curved pattern about 2 feet wide, where something heavy had stood. The gouges were deep, like someone had pressed 4 thick fingers into soft clay. Tommy crouched down beside me, his skepticism finally giving way to curiosity. "What made those?" I just looked at him. "You know what made those." Lee had wandered a few feet away and suddenly called out, "Guys, look at this!" We went over to where he was standing. He was pointing at a pine tree about 7 feet up the trunk. 3 long scratches had been carved into the bark, each about an inch deep and 4 inches long. They were fresh. The exposed wood was still oozing sap. "Could be a bear," Tommy said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Bears don't stand on 2 legs for that long," I replied, "and they don't have fingers like what made those marks in the ground." We found more evidence as we looked around. A tuft of that greyish-brown hair caught on a bramble, a broken sapling that would have taken significant strength to snap, and most disturbing of all, what looked like a trail leading deeper into the woods, away from the Carter property, where something large had moved through the underbrush. We followed the trail for about 50 yards before Tommy suddenly stopped. "This is far enough," he said, and there was real fear in his voice now. "We should go back." I wanted to keep going, to find out where the trail led, to maybe catch another glimpse of whatever I'd seen. But even as that thought formed, a feeling of dread washed over me. What would I do if I actually found it again? What if it wasn't alone? We backed away and hurried back to the houses where the 4th of July celebrations were getting underway. We never told the adults what we'd found. Somehow, I knew they wouldn't believe us, or worse, they'd come up with some rational explanation that would make us doubt ourselves. That evening, As fireworks exploded overhead and everyone oohed and ahed, I kept staring at the dark line of trees at the back of the Carter property. Just once, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a shadow deeper than the others, maybe even the reflection of yellow eyes watching our celebrations from the safety of the forest. But it might have been my imagination. We left my grandmother's house 2 days later. I never went back into those woods again, though we continued to visit her until she passed away in 2003. The Carters moved away the following year. I lost touch with Tommy and Lee, though I sometimes wonder if they remember that night as vividly as I do. I've researched what we might have seen over the years. Bigfoot sightings aren't uncommon in the piney woods of East Texas, but most descriptions don't mention yellow eyes or that unsettling combination of human and inhuman traits. Whatever we encountered that night, it doesn't neatly fit into any cryptid category I've found. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just my overactive childhood imagination, a bear misidentified in the twilight or some elaborate prank. But then I remember those yellow eyes, intelligent and aware. I remember how it raised its hand to block the light, such a deliberate, conscious gesture. And I know whatever it was real. Those woods are still there, the pond is still there, and sometimes I wonder, is it still there too, watching and waiting in the shadows between the pines? And how many other people have glimpsed those yellow eyes in the darkness, only to have their stories dismissed as imagination or hysteria? I don't know if I'll ever have answers, but I know what I saw that night in 1997, and no amount of rational explanation will ever erase those yellow eyes from my memory. Story 12. I've been sitting on this story for over 13 years now. I never really wanted to share it because I honestly still don't understand what happened that night, and I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy. But I can't keep it bottled up anymore. It's eaten away at me for too long. This happened back in spring 2010. I was 32 at the time, and my husband Mark was 36. We lived in a small town in East Texas and were both avid hunters. We had this hunting lease about 20 miles out of town that we'd visit regularly, especially for wild hogs, which were practically overrunning the place. It was this beautiful, isolated spot, nothing but thick pine forests for miles. During the day it was peaceful, but at night it had this eerie quality that I used to find exciting, used to. That night started like any other hunting trip. It was late May, right when the humidity starts getting unbearable in Texas. We'd waited until after dark to head out because hogs are more active at night. We threw our gear in Mark's F-150, rifles, spotlight, some snacks, the usual stuff. We'd done this probably 100 times before. We arrived at the lease around 10 p.m. The air was thick, that kind of humidity where your clothes stick to you within minutes. The woods were alive with noise, crickets chirping like crazy, frogs calling out from a nearby creek, the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. Just normal night sounds, you know. We parked at the edge of this clearing we always used. There was this stand of old oak trees nearby that created a perfect backdrop. The hogs would often come out of the tree line there to root around in the tall grass. The full moon was partially covered by clouds, casting these weird, shifting shadows across the field. Mark grabbed his rifle and positioned himself about 15 yards ahead of me. This was our usual setup. He'd take point, and I'd stay closer to the truck with the spotlight, scanning the tree line for any movement. It was a system that had worked well for us for years. I remember checking my watch. It was 10:23 p.m. I was sweeping the spotlight along the edge of the woods when something felt off. It's hard to explain, but something in the atmosphere changed. The hair on my arms stood up, and I suddenly got goosebumps despite the warm night. Then the woods just went completely silent. Not gradually quiet, but instantly silent. Like someone had hit a mute button on the whole forest. 1 second, deafening insect and frog noise. The next, absolutely nothing. No wind, no animals, nothing. Total silence. I called out to Mark in a whisper, "Hey, You hear that?" He nodded, already on alert. Mark's an experienced outdoorsman, spent his whole life in these woods, and I could tell by his posture that he was sensing the same wrongness I was. That's when I noticed movement about 60 yards out. The tall grass near the tree line was moving, parting, like something was pushing through it. Something big. But here's the thing that still makes my skin crawl. I couldn't see what was making the grass move. The spotlight should have illuminated any animal, but there was nothing there. Just the grass being pushed aside by nothing. Whatever it was heading straight toward us. Fast. I could hear heavy, thumping footsteps, branches snapping, the unmistakable sounds of something large moving through the brush. But there was absolutely nothing visible. The spotlight showed empty air where something should have been. The invisible thing picked up speed. The grass parted faster, the footsteps got louder, heavier. I stood there frozen, my brain unable to process what my eyes were seeing, or rather, not seeing. Suddenly Mark shouted, "Get in the truck, now!" His voice was different than I'd ever heard it, high-pitched, panicked. In the 12 years we'd been married, I'd never heard him sound scared like that. Mark doesn't scare easily. He's the type who stays calm during emergencies, who handles crisis situations without breaking a sweat. But right then, he was terrified. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the spotlight and ran. Mark was right behind me. We both dove into the truck, slamming our doors shut at almost the same time. Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get them into the ignition. That's when it hit us. Something massive slammed into the passenger side of the truck with enough force to rock the entire vehicle. The truck actually lifted off its wheels on my side. I was thrown against Mark, and he was crushed against his door. The impact was so violent that the glove compartment popped open and the side mirror shattered. I screamed. I couldn't help it. Mark was yelling too, finally getting the key in the ignition, but before he could turn it, the thing started circling the truck. Fast, impossibly fast. We could hear it running around us, its heavy footsteps thumping against the ground so hard we could feel the vibrations through the seats. As it moved, it dragged something sharp against the truck's exterior. The sound was awful, like metal being torn apart. Long, deep, scratching noises as whatever it was dragged what sounded like claws along the doors, windows and fenders. Each pass got more aggressive, more frenzied. Then the smell hit us. Even with the windows closed, this overwhelming stench flooded the truck's cabin. It was like wet earth, rotten meat, and something else, something I can't even describe. It was primal, ancient, wrong. My eyes watered and I gagged. Mark actually vomited a little in his mouth. Through the windows we could see nothing but empty air where the sounds were coming from. The scratching continued, getting more violent. Then something hit the hood so hard it left a massive dent. I could see it cave in right in front of us. The windshield cracked from the impact, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across the glass. Mark finally got the engine started. He threw the truck into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt as we shot backward. Whatever was attacking us let out this sound, not a growl or a roar, but something closer to metal grinding against metal, but organic somehow. It's a sound I still hear in my nightmares. As we sped away, the headlights briefly caught something in their beam, or maybe not something, but a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but denser, moving. Just for a split second, I thought I saw a shape within that distortion. Tall, massive, not quite solid. But it was gone so fast I can't be sure it wasn't just terror playing tricks on my mind. We tore down that dirt road going at least 60 mph, which is insane on those rough tracks. Mark didn't slow down until we hit the main highway, and even then he kept pushing 90 all the way back toward town. We didn't speak, couldn't speak. I was sobbing, and Mark's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles bulging. It wasn't until we were about halfway home that either of us found our voice. "What the fuck was that?" Mark finally whispered, his voice hoarse. I had no answer. The truth is, I still don't. We got home around midnight. Neither of us slept. We just sat at our kitchen table, drinking coffee, occasionally looking at each other, then looking away. The fear was still so raw, so present in the room with us. We didn't even examine the truck that night. I think we were both afraid of what we might find. When morning came, we finally gathered enough courage to go outside and look at the damage. What we saw made my blood run cold all over again. The entire passenger side of the truck was covered in deep gouges. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterned marks that ran from the bottom of the doors all the way up to the top of the windows. The metal was peeled back in places like a can opener had been taken to it. The dent in the hood was so deep it had cracked the engine block. The roof had 4 parallel indentations that looked exactly like something had grabbed the top of the truck with massive claws. But here's the part that still makes me feel sick. Mark insisted we go back to the clearing, not to hunt, just to see if there was any evidence of what had happened, maybe tracks we could identify. I didn't want to go, but he was determined, and I wasn't letting him go alone. So we borrowed his brother's truck and drove back out there, arriving around 10 a.m. The clearing looked normal in the daylight, peaceful even. But as we approached where we'd parked the night before, we saw something that made us both stop in our tracks. In a perfect circle right where our truck had been were pine tree tops. Not branches, but the actual tops of pine trees, the upper 15-20 feet of them arranged in a deliberate circle. The trees they'd come from were visible at the edge of the clearing, their tops cleanly removed as if cut with some enormous precision tool. These weren't blown down by wind or broken naturally. They were deliberately placed, not randomly scattered but arranged with purpose, forming a perfect circle approximately the size of our truck. We stood there staring at it for maybe 5 minutes before Mark finally said, "We need to leave. Now." We left immediately and have never returned to that lease. We gave it up that same week. Mark sold his truck at a massive loss because he couldn't stand to look at it. We didn't report what happened because, honestly, what would we say? That an invisible monster attacked our truck? That something tore the tops off 30-foot pine trees and arranged them in a circle? In the years since, I've tried researching similar experiences, looking for any explanation. I've looked into everything from Bigfoot to skinwalker legends to government experiments. Nothing fits exactly what we experienced. Mark refuses to talk about it anymore. He's convinced himself it was some kind of territorial animal, maybe a bear, and that the tree arrangement was just a strange coincidence. I know he doesn't really believe that. As for me, I don't hunt anymore. I don't even like going into the woods. Sometimes when it's very quiet, I swear I can hear that metallic screeching sound in the distance. And on humid nights, I sometimes catch a whiff of that same putrid smell. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what was out there in those woods, but I know it was real. I know it was intelligent, and I know it wanted us gone. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, watching, waiting for someone else to stumble into its territory. And sometimes, when I can't sleep at night, I wonder if it followed us home. Story 13. I still get chills talking about this, even though it happened 26 years ago. I've never been able to fully explain what I saw that night at Pine Shadow Creek when I was just 8 years old. I'm only sharing this now because I finally found a community where people might actually believe me, instead of just dismissing it as a kid's overactive imagination. It was August 1997, and my family had been planning this camping trip for months. My dad had this old pop-up camper. Nothing fancy, just a step up from tent camping with a couple of fold-out beds and a tiny kitchenette. My older sister Megan was 12 and complained the whole drive about missing her friend's pool party to sleep in the woods with bugs. Mum had packed enough food for a week, even though we were only staying for 4 days, and Dad was excited to try out his new fishing gear. Pine Shadow Creek was this beautiful spot in the Pacific Northwest, about 3 hours from our house. The campground wasn't very developed, just a few designated sites spread far apart with a communal bathroom facility in the center. Our spot was at the edge of the grounds, right beside the creek with a steep embankment leading down to the water. Dad chose it specifically because he said the fishing would be better away from where all the other families were splashing around. We arrived in the afternoon and spent hours setting everything up. Dad struggled with the camper while Mom organized all our stuff. I helped gather kindling for the fire, and even Megan eventually stopped sulking long enough to help set up the folding chairs. By dinner time, we had a pretty cozy camp established. Our pop-up camper was parked about 15 feet from the creek's edge. There was a fire pit surrounded by our camping chairs, a picnic table where Mom had set up a little outdoor kitchen with our coolers and supplies, and a lantern hanging from a tall shepherd's hook that Dad had hammered into the ground. That first day was perfect. Swimming in the creek, though Mom made us stay in the shallow parts, hiking a short trail, and roasting hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire. Even Megan admitted she was having fun. By the time we crawled into the camper for the night, I was exhausted but happy. Mom and Dad took the larger bed at one end, and Megan and I were supposed to share the smaller one at the opposite end. But she built a wall of pillows between us because she said I kicked in my sleep. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up. The campground was completely silent, except for the gentle rushing of the creek. At first I thought I needed to pee, but then I heard something outside, a rustling noise near our trash bag that Dad had secured to a tree to keep animals out. I carefully climbed over Megan's pillow fortress without waking her, and moved to the small side window of the camper that faced the creek. Peering out, I could see our campsite dimly lit by the lantern Dad had left on low for safety. Sure enough, there were 3 raccoons working together to get into our trash. I watched them, fascinated by how clever they were with their little hands. I was about to go wake up Dad when I noticed something strange. The raccoons kept stopping what they were doing and looking toward the tree line across the creek. They'd freeze, stare for several seconds, then nervously return to the trash. Then suddenly, all 3 raccoons scattered in different directions, disappearing into the darkness so fast it was like they'd been shot from cannons. That's when I heard it. A heavy splashing sound from the creek. It wasn't the sound of a fish jumping or a branch falling into the water. This was deliberate, like something large was moving through the water. I ducked down instinctively, but kept my eyes just above the window ledge. The splashing continued for maybe 10 seconds, and then I saw it, a massive shape emerging from the water at the bottom of the embankment. The creek at that point was pretty deep, maybe 5 or 6 feet, and the bank rose steeply about 10 feet up to our campsite. Whatever this thing was, it pulled itself out of the water and began climbing up the embankment. As it climbed, it made this sound I'll never forget, a deep rumbling growl that transitioned into short, grunting sounds. I remember thinking it was weird because it didn't sound exactly like any animal I knew, not a bear or a cougar or anything I'd heard in nature documentaries. When it reached the top of the embankment and stepped into our campsite, the lantern light finally gave me a clear view and my blood turned to ice. This thing was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It had broad shoulders and was covered entirely in thick, dark hair that dripped water onto the ground. It stood on 2 legs, moving in a way that seemed purposeful. I was completely frozen with fear. I couldn't call out, couldn't move. I just watched as this creature began to move around our campsite, sniffing at things. It went to the picnic table first, where Mom had covered our cooler with a tarp. It seemed to investigate everything by smell, leaning down to sniff our chairs, the remains of our fire pit, even the ground where we had been walking all day. Before I could even process what I was seeing, there was another loud splash from the creek. I tore my eyes away from the first creature long enough to see a second one pulling itself up the embankment. This one was similar but slightly smaller. It made those same distinctive growls and grunts as it joined the first one in exploring our campsite. The two of them moved around with what seemed like curiosity rather than aggression. They didn't knock things over or tear anything apart. They just examined everything meticulously. The smaller one came alarmingly close to our camper at one point, and I dropped down completely out of sight, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would wake up my family. I could hear its heavy breathing right outside the thin wall of the camper, just inches from where I was crouched. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, it moved away. I cautiously raised my head to peek out the window again. The creatures were both near the tree where Dad had hung our trash. The larger one reached up, stretching to a height that no human could reach, and easily untied the knot Dad had spent several minutes securing. But instead of tearing into the bag like the raccoons had tried to do, it just sniffed the bag, then let it drop to the ground untouched. Then, without any obvious signal between them, both creatures turned and headed back toward the creek. They moved down the embankment with surprising grace for their size, making those same grunting sounds. There were 2 loud splashes, and then silence returned to the campsite. I stayed frozen by that window for what must have been at least an hour, terrified they might come back. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I crawled back to bed, pulling my sleeping bag over my head. I don't think I actually slept again that night. When morning came, I was torn about whether to tell my family. Would they believe me? Would they think I just had a nightmare? As we all got up and Mum started making breakfast, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The trash bag was on the ground, not hanging where Dad had left it. "Did you check the trash last night, Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He looked confused. "No, must have been raccoons. Those little guys are smart with knots." I almost told them everything right then, but Megan interrupted. "Can we go swimming after breakfast? You promised." The moment passed, and a strange feeling came over me, like this was something I needed to keep to myself. While everyone was busy with breakfast, I snuck down to the creek bank. What I found makes me shiver to this day. There were deep gouges in the dirt where something had pulled itself up from the water. 4 distinct trails of finger-like marks dragging upward. They were much larger and deeper than anything human hands could make, and spaced further apart too. I covered them with loose dirt and leaves before rejoining my family. We spent the rest of the trip doing normal camping things, but I insisted on staying close to the camper after dark, claiming I was tired from swimming. Dad thought I was disappointed about not seeing any cool animals at night, and promised we'd go looking for deer on our next camping trip. If only he knew. For years I kept this experience to myself. When I was 12, I tried researching what I might have seen. All signs pointed to the obvious, but I hesitated to accept it. These weren't bears. Bears don't move like that, don't investigate things that way, and certainly don't retie trash bags. As I got older, I considered telling my parents. But what was the point? They'd either think I was making it up, or that my childhood imagination had transformed a normal forest encounter into something supernatural. The older I get, the more certain I become about what I saw. Those weren't any known animals, at least not any officially recognized ones. The way they moved, the sounds they made, their behavior. It all points to something that isn't supposed to exist. The gouges in the embankment were real. The trash on the ground was real. The fear I felt was definitely real. I've been camping many times since then, but never again at Pine Shadow Creek. I've also never again slept soundly in the woods. Every snapping twig, every rustling bush makes me wonder if they're out there again, approaching from the water where you'd least expect them. Sometimes I try to rationalize it. Maybe they were just bears walking strangely. Maybe the darkness and the lantern light played tricks on my eyes. Maybe it was all just a vivid dream that my 8-year-old brain couldn't separate from reality. But then I remember those deep, grunting sounds. The methodical way they investigated our camp, and those massive hand-like marks in the mud of the creek bank. And I know what I saw that night was real, even if I'll never be able to prove it or fully explain it. To this day, when I hear splashing water at night, my whole body goes rigid with fear. Whatever crossed that creek and visited our campsite that night at Pine Shadow Creek wasn't supposed to exist. But it did. They did. And they're probably still out there, crossing creeks in the darkness when no one's watching. At least, no one, except for terrified 8-year-old kids who happen to be looking out windows when they should be sleeping. Story 14. I've never shared this with anyone outside my immediate family. Even now, typing this out, my hands are getting clammy. I know how it sounds. I know what people will think, but I swear on everything I hold dear, this happened exactly as I'm about to describe it. It was October 2011, and I was hauling a load from Houston back to my place in northern Alabama. I drive a semi, have been for about 15 years now. Nothing fancy, just an older Peterbilt that gets the job done. That particular night, I was cutting through southern Arkansas on Highway 84, trying to make up some time after getting held up at a way station earlier. Around midnight, I started getting that heavy-eyed feeling that all truckers know too well. My lower back was killing me from sitting so long, and I needed to stretch my legs and splash some water on my face. I wasn't about to risk nodding off, especially on those winding Arkansas back roads. I took the next exit I saw. Can't remember the name of it, but it was somewhere between Crossett and Monticello. It was just a small off-ramp with a wide shoulder. No gas station, no rest area, nothing, just a place to pull over. As soon as I stopped and cut the engine, I realized how isolated it was. The kind of quiet that almost hurts your ears after hours of road noise. The moon was nearly full that night, casting everything in this weird blue-silver glow. I could see pine trees stretching out in all directions, and there was swampy lowland off to one side. You could smell it, that distinct mix of stagnant water and decomposing vegetation. The air was heavy with moisture, typical for that part of Arkansas in October. Not cold, but cool enough that you could see your breath if you exhaled hard. I hopped down from the cab, groaning as my knees popped. Man, did it feel good to stretch. I walked around to the front of my truck, did some basic stretches, then moved toward the edge of the shoulder, where it met the grassy area before the tree line. I was just standing there, enjoying the stillness, listening to the distant chorus of frogs and crickets, when something caught my eye. About 50 yards away, along the edge of the trees, something moved. At first I didn't think much of it. Arkansas woods are full of deer, coyotes, the occasional black bear. Whatever it was seemed large, but in the moonlight, distances and sizes can play tricks on you. What made me stop and really focus was when the shadow stopped moving too. It just stood there, watching me. I couldn't make out details, just a dark silhouette taller than a man should be, partially obscured by the tree line. That's when the first real chill hit me. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize you're being watched, when your brain picks up on something your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. Every hair on my arms stood up. My mouth went dry. Something wasn't right about the way it was standing. Something wasn't right about its proportions. I'm not a coward, but I'm not stupid either. When you're alone in the middle of nowhere and something doesn't feel right, you listen to that feeling. I backed up toward my truck, never taking my eyes off that spot in the tree line. The shadow didn't move. It just stayed there, watching. I climbed back into my cab faster than I probably ever have, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking as I put the key in the ignition, but I didn't start the engine yet. Instead, I flipped on my high beams, thinking I could get a better look at whatever was out there. What those headlights illuminated is something I'll never forget for as long as I live. Standing directly in the middle of the off-ramp, right in front of my truck, was, I don't even know what to call it. A creature, a being, those words seemed too small. It was enormous, easily 7 or 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were broader than any human I've ever seen, with a chest like a barrel. The entire body was covered in dark, shaggy hair that moved slightly in the breeze created by my headlights. Not fur exactly, more like hair, but thicker and coarser than human hair. In the harsh light, it had a deep brown, almost black color. But what really got me, what made my blood turn to ice, was what it was carrying. Draped over its right shoulder was a full-grown buck. A big one too, at least a 10-pointer from what I could see. The creature was holding it by both legs with just one massive hand, like it weighed nothing more than a grocery bag. That deer had to be 200 pounds at least, and this thing was carrying it one-handed like I'd carry a jacket. The creature wasn't hunched over from the weight. It stood perfectly straight, staring directly at my truck, at me, its face. God, its face. It wasn't exactly human, but it wasn't like any animal I've seen either. The eyes were deep-set under a heavy brow, dark, but catching just enough light from my headlights to glimmer. Its nose was broad and flat, and its jaw seemed powerful, protruding slightly. But it was the eyes that haunted me then, and still haunt me now. There was intelligence there, awareness. It wasn't looking at me with fear or even curiosity. It was looking at me with recognition, like it knew exactly what I was, and it was giving me a choice. Stay in the truck and be safe, or step outside and find out what happens. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. My entire body was frozen. I couldn't have screamed if I'd wanted to. I couldn't have moved if the truck was on fire. All I could do was stare back at this impossible thing standing in my headlights. Then, without any hurry, it turned away from me. It didn't run or scamper or move like any animal I know. It walked, upright on 2 legs, with the deer still effortlessly slung over its shoulder. It moved toward the tree line on the opposite side of the road from where I'd first seen the shadow. The way it walked, there was a fluidity to it, like each step was perfectly measured, no wasted motion, no sound that I could hear through my closed windows. It just walked away, each step deliberate, until it reached the trees and simply disappeared into them. 1 second, it was there, this massive figure silhouetted against my headlights, and the next it was gone, swallowed by the darkness between the pines. I sat there for maybe another minute, unable to move, barely breathing. Then something in me snapped, and I fired up that engine so fast I'm surprised I didn't strip the starter. I pulled back onto Highway 84 and drove. I didn't stop for gas. I didn't stop to use the bathroom. I didn't stop until I crossed the Mississippi state line, and even then I only stopped because my hands were shaking so bad I needed to pull over. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. Could it have been a man in a costume? No way. Nobody makes costumes that realistic, and nobody could carry a full-grown deer one-handed like it was nothing. A bear standing on its hind legs. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. This wasn't a bear. The proportions were all wrong, and bears don't walk upright for that long or with that kind of steady gait. What I saw that night didn't fit into any category I have for understanding the world. Before this, I'd laugh at stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. I'm not laughing anymore. The thing that really gets me, the thing I can't shake, is the feeling that it let me see it. That it chose to walk in front of my headlights, that it could have easily remained hidden in the trees, but for whatever reason, it wanted me to know it was there. I still drive trucks, still take that route sometimes when a job requires it, but I don't stop on that stretch of Highway 84 anymore, not for anything, and I've installed extra floodlights on my rig, the brightest ones I could find. Some of the other drivers give me grief about it, call me Lighthouse and other names. Let them laugh, they haven't seen what I've seen. Sometimes at night, when I'm driving through wooded areas, I catch myself scanning the tree lines, looking for movement, for shadows that shouldn't be there. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see something watching me from between the trees, something tall and dark that doesn't belong in this world as I understand it. I don't know what I encountered that night in Arkansas. I don't know if it was what people call Bigfoot or if it was something else entirely. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it changed something fundamental in how I see the world. I still have nightmares about those eyes, about the way they looked at me. Not with malice, but with something almost worse. Recognition. Like it knew me, or at least knew what I was. Like we were two different species, sharing a moment of mutual acknowledgement before going our separate ways. I've never told this story publicly before. My wife knows. My brother knows. That's it. I don't need people thinking I'm crazy, or that I made this up for attention. I know what I saw. I know it was real. And I know that there are things in this world that we don't understand. Things that exist in the shadows just beyond the reach of our headlights. That's all I've got. Take it for what it's worth. I'm not trying to convince anyone, just needed to get it off my chest. I still drive that route sometimes, but I never stop. Not anymore. And if you're ever on Highway 84 between Crosset and Monticello late at night, keep driving. Don't pull over. Don't stop to stretch your legs. And whatever you do, don't look too closely at the shadows moving between the trees. Some things once seen can't be unseen, and some memories, no matter how impossible they seem, never fade. Story 15. I still get chills thinking about what happened that night on Route 16. This was about 15 years ago, back when I was 24. My girlfriend Sarah, who's now my wife, my buddy Clay, and I were heading back to Jackson after spending the weekend in Mobile. It was supposed to be just another late-night drive home. We were in my old Jeep Wrangler, the one with no doors and the soft top removed. Looking back, maybe having that open-air setup made what happened even more terrifying. There was literally nothing between us and whatever that thing was. It must have been around midnight. The road between Carthage and Yazoo City was completely deserted. No other cars, no lights except my headlights cutting through the darkness. On both sides of the highway were these dense pine woods and marshy areas that seemed to press right up against the road. I remember thinking how isolated it felt out there, miles from anywhere, surrounded by wilderness. I was doing about 70-75 mph, trying to make good time. Clay had crashed out in the back seat about an hour earlier, snoring away. Sarah was fighting to stay awake in the passenger seat, her head bobbing every few minutes before she'd jerk herself awake again. The radio was playing some classic rock station that kept fading in and out with static. I remember thinking I should just turn it off when suddenly something caught my eye on the right side of the road. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. When you're driving late at night on empty roads, your brain starts to see things that aren't there. But this was real. Someone had stepped out from the tree line. I only saw it for maybe 2 seconds as we flew past at highway speed, but those 2 seconds are burned into my memory forever. In my rearview mirror, I could see it continuing to walk along the edge where the asphalt met the woods, moving in the same direction we were traveling. The moment it appeared, Sarah and I both jolted forward. Our heads snapped toward each other at the exact same instant. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open in shock. That's when I knew she'd seen it too. This wasn't road fatigue or my imagination. Did you just... I started to ask. What the fuck was that? She whispered, twisting around in her seat to look behind us. Jackson, what the fuck was that? I immediately started to slow down. I don't know. I'm going to turn around. No! She grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. Don't you dare turn around. Keep driving. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. But didn't you see it? That wasn't normal. Exactly why we're not turning around, she said, her voice shaking. She kept looking back over her shoulder, her grip on my arm not loosening. I've never been a believer in the supernatural or cryptids or any of that stuff. I'm pretty grounded in reality. But what we saw standing at the edge of those woods wasn't something I could explain. It was tall, way too tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over what a person should be. I'd estimate at least 7 or 8 feet, maybe more. Its proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were broad, almost like a linebacker, but the arms... God, the arms hung down almost to its knees, swinging slightly as it walked. The way it moved is what really got to me. It wasn't lumbering like a bear trying to walk on its hind legs. It wasn't stumbling like someone in a costume. The movement was fluid, practiced, like something that had been walking on 2 legs for a very, very long time. There was a purpose to its stride, like it knew exactly where it was going. We only saw it from behind, which somehow made it worse. Its head seemed to sit low on its shoulders, which hunched forward slightly. The whole thing was covered in thick hair or fur, a pale greyish colour that caught the light from our headlights for just a moment before we passed. It shimmered slightly, like it was damp. The weirdest part, it never reacted to us. It never. Our Jeep wasn't quiet. The engine was loud, the tires were rumbling on the asphalt, and the wind was whipping through the open top. But this thing never turned, never flinched, never acknowledged us whatsoever. It just kept walking along the tree line as if we weren't even there. For the next 20 miles, Sarah and I barely spoke. We were both processing what we'd seen. Every few minutes, one of us would say something like, "That couldn't have been a person, right?" Or, "Maybe it was someone on stilts." But we both knew better. What we saw wasn't human. After about 30 minutes of tense silence, we pulled into a gas station in Batonia. My hands were still shaking as I filled up the tank. Clay finally woke up, stretching and yawning in the back seat. "Why are we stopping?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. I glanced at Sarah, then back at Clay. "Dude, you won't believe what we just saw back on Route 16. He sat up, suddenly interested. "What?" I described what we'd seen as accurately as I could. Sarah nodded along, adding details I'd missed. The whole time, Clay's expression went from curious to amused to outright laughing. "You guys are so full of shit," he said, shaking his head. "You saw a bear, man. They stand up sometimes." "It wasn't a bear," Sarah insisted. "I've seen bears. This wasn't that." "Or it was some tall dude walking home drunk," Clay suggested, still chuckling. "You know how it is out in these country roads. Probably some basketball player who lives out in the sticks." "Basketball players don't have arms that hang to their knees," I said. Clay just rolled his eyes. "Look, I know it's boring driving at night. You guys probably saw something normal, and your tired brains turned it into Bigfoot or whatever." We gave up trying to convince him. What was the point? He hadn't seen it. We had. The rest of the drive back to Jackson was uneventful but tense. Every time we passed a wooded area, I could feel Sarah tense up beside me. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that figure again. When we dropped Clay off at his apartment, he was still making jokes about us seeing the Mississippi swamp monster. As he grabbed his duffel bag from the back, he pointed at us. "You two need to lay off the horror movies for real." Once we were alone in the Jeep, Sarah turned to me. "We're not telling anyone else about this." I nodded. "Who'd believe us anyway?" "No, I mean it," she said firmly. "If we tell people what we saw, they'll think we're crazy. Let's just keep this between us." And that's mostly what we've done for the past 15 years. I've mentioned it to a few close friends after a few beers, but always in a way that makes it sound like an amusing anecdote rather than something that fundamentally shook my understanding of reality. Sarah and I don't talk about it much anymore, but sometimes when we're driving on a dark road, I'll catch her scanning the tree line. I know she's looking for it, just like I am. Here's the thing that really bothers me. In the years since, I've occasionally gone online to research similar sightings in Mississippi. There aren't many, but the few I've found describe something eerily similar, tall, gray, with those unnaturally long arms. One account from a trucker in 2010 mentioned seeing something matching that description in almost the exact same stretch of Route 16. What keeps me up at night isn't just what we saw. It's knowing that whatever it was, it's probably still out there, walking those woods between Carthage and Yazoo City. And sometimes I wonder, if we had turned around that night, what would we have discovered? Would it have acknowledged us then? Or would it have continued to ignore us, as if we were the ones who didn't belong in its world? I've driven that stretch of road maybe a dozen times since then, always during daylight hours. The woods don't look nearly as threatening in the sunlight. They look like normal Mississippi pine forests. Nothing special, nothing sinister, but I know better now. I know what walks there after midnight. Every time I pass that spot, I slow down just a little, my eyes searching the tree line. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, just to confirm I'm not crazy. A bigger part of me is terrified that I will. The rational part of my brain has tried to explain it away countless times over the years. Maybe it was a person with some medical condition that caused excessive height. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe it was just a strange shadow or optical illusion caused by the headlights. But then I remember Sarah's face that night. The pure, unfiltered shock and fear. I remember how we both saw it at the exact same moment, how we both turned to each other with the same expression. Whatever it was, we both witnessed it. It was real. I've never believed in Bigfoot or Sasquatch or any of those cryptid legends. I'm still not sure I do. But I know what I saw on Route 16 that night wasn't something that's supposed to exist in our world. It moved with too much purpose, too much familiarity with its surroundings, like it belonged there, and we were the intruders. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, walking that same path along the edge of the woods. Does it do that every night? Is it patrolling some invisible boundary between its world and ours? Or was it traveling somewhere specific that night, somewhere deep in those Mississippi forests where things like it gather? I don't have answers. I probably never will. All I know is that for a brief moment 15 years ago, the boundary between the world I thought I knew and something else entirely became paper thin. And even though it never acknowledged us, never turned its head or showed its face, I'm certain it knew we were there. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I imagine what would have happened if I'd ignored Sarah's grip on my arm and turned the Jeep around anyway. Would we have seen it face to face? Would it have finally acknowledged our presence? Or would it have simply disappeared back into the tree line like it had never been there at all? I'll never know. And honestly, I think that's for the best. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, some creatures aren't meant to be seen, and some roads are best traveled only once, with your eyes fixed firmly ahead and your foot heavy on the gas pedal, putting as much distance as possible between yourself and whatever watches from the edge of the woods.